Power is a new preoccupation, in a sense, a new idea in science. The Industrial Revolution, the English Revolution, turned out to be the great discoverer of power. Sources of energy were sought in nature: wind, sun, water, steam, coal. And the question suddenly came up, why are they all one? What relation exists between them? That had never been asked before. Until then, science had been entirely concerned with exploring nature as she is. But now the modern conception of transforming nature had come up. Sadi Carnot, a French engineer, looking at steam engines like this, old engines, founded in essence the science of thermodynamics, the dynamics of heat. Energy had become the central concept in science, and its main concern was the unity of nature, of which energy is the core. And not only in science. You see, the surprise is that while this is going on, what is going on in literature? The uprush of romantic poetry round about the year 1800. How could the romantic poets be interested in industry? Very simply, the new concept of nature as the carrier of energy took them by storm. They loved the word storm.
Let me ask you, if you use Apple, you can't get to all of that fundamental stuff very directly. It's all shielded from you. They hide everything. So it's not like Windows where, it's all.
Oh, good. I have an Apple.
So that, I think that's why a certain generation, which is strictly Apple, it's handed to them and they really can't look at it at that level. Don't worry your little heads. It's just the Apple take care of everything.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I met another person, I think was about my age, that said that her first computer was a Commodore 64, and she, we all remember a world before the Google Oracle, right? I mean,
when I started working on computers, I knew the electronic diagrams, the flip-flop circuits. I knew how to boot by hand. IPL off the disk, by putting the right numbers in to start the load. All that stuff. Things are really getting off right now.
I remember I felt offended. I had an Apple II clone called the Franklin Ace 1200, and I love the intimacy of the machine. I like programming not only in BASIC, but integer BASIC. And I even had the 6502 Motorola assembly tutor. And it was so much fun just having the joystick x-axis track with the speaker frequency. It was so mind-blowing to be in that intimate level. Then the Mac came out, and I remembered that you couldn't get in there and play with there were 6 slots on the Apple where you could add expansion cards and stuff, and you can even jerry-rig the cassette input-output ports to connect it to a tape recorder. My friends are doing all this hobbyist Raspberry Pi type stuff today. And it was so much fun, and that all ended when the Mac came out. Everything became enclosed, and I thought, this is alienating. But of course, the Mac was, I cried when I first saw the Mac and the GUI interface. I cried. In fact, the guy that invented something called CompuServe lived in my neighborhood. He was so rich. He bought his son Plato, which was an online education system in the 70s. And he had Elisa. He had Elisa the week it came out. So I got to see Elisa at this guy's house. And I was like, this can't be happening. I saw what was going to happen in the future, and it was so beautiful. But it was alienating, wasn't it, Dave? Because it cut you off from the interior of the computer.
Well, you're yelling at it, saying, I'm a fucking neurosurgeon, let me in here. And it's not letting you in. And then the other thing is, the first time my ex-wife was working, she was on a Mac interface, and she put something in the trash and went, gobbled it up. I went, holy shit. Wow.
So this is how you guys reach the sublime moment. That's not the way I reach the sublime moment. But it seems like you are wow, this is
Hey Scott, tell that story about the dude in your community that tapped into the hard drive and somehow hacked the software.
Who's that? Who's that?
Well, Scott told me this story about this guy that would go into the hard drive and he somehow tapped in. He hacked some programs, and it had to do with getting into the old sort of mechanical hard drives.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's
yeah, that's okay.
There's timing track, yeah.
So Mr. Crackman, who's famous for being the guy that cracked a lot of the Electronic Arts games for the Apple, like Dr. J versus Larry Bird, was Craig Fagan. His name was Craig Fagan. He lived down the street from me, and
wow,
he got in trouble a lot as a kid. But he showed me how to use. I can't remember the name of the software. It was called EED. EED. So you had to open up the 5 1/4-inch drive and use an eyeglass screwdriver and change the speed of the spinning disc in order, and it gave you like a list. And all you had to do is basically match the bits. But once you did that, it would copy the sector. So you had to do that like 512 times. And it was a real pain in the butt, but it was so much fun. It was more fun. It was like, when you cook your first scrambled eggs or whatever it is for the first time, the eggs taste so much better than the store-bought stuff. It was that. It was that joy of making the thing and doing it. It was, because all labor today is alienated. Like Dave was saying, everything's handed to you. Like when I was in Kashmir, we go to the grocery store and we see meat already in plastic and it looks like meat. And I went to a wedding and they had on one side of this guy was rich. He had his own block in Delhi, in downtown Delhi. He had a lot of money. So on one side of his estate were the sheep wandering around and the children were playing with them. Then they would slit their throats. Then they deliver the carcass to one guy. And then the body of the sheep would branch out and go down 3 different assembly lines. And in each assembly line, it came out as a different food. Like in one of them, they turned it kind of like a soft pudding. It was like almost like a Jello. And the other one, they kept it rough and kind of stringy. I couldn't believe it. And then at the end of the line, the children were playing now with sheep heads. The heads were arranged in the form of a pyramid. It was like, this is reality. This is where meat really comes from. I feel guilty. No one cries more about animal suffering than I do. But nonetheless, I'm still a piece of shit hypocrite. I still buy meat at the grocery store. But when I saw this, I thought, this should be a criterion. If you're going to eat meat, you have to kill the animal. If we required the housewives of America to kill the animals that they were going to eat, there'd be a lot less meat eating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean,
I'm not sure.
Anyone who hasn't been at that level in a machine is so unempowered when they're confronting. It's just like, oh, this doesn't work. I mean, there's nothing to think about it because you don't understand how the pieces fit together. All you can do is go to Google, and that's like, it's not even using your brain anymore. So it's a different relationship, but it is an alienation.
But actually, there's a utopian aspect to that because now there's no more bullshitting and lying. So if there's any question, all it takes, and this is for the first time in history, we're living in this moment. There's no more puzzlement or wondering or not being sure. You don't have to go to the card catalog, and it doesn't take 2 days to walk down the stacks to find anything out. You can whip your phone out at any party, and if anyone says anything that's questionable, you can find out with fairly excellent certainty because there'll be footnotes you can check whether or not it's true. So it's like it's the day of wonder, is over, and the day of bullshitting. The day of bullshitting should be over.
Well, maybe that's why there are no more facts in public anymore. Maybe that's why people who are going to argue resort to denying everything that's factual, including fact checkers.
Well,
because you can bring the facts up, they have to really just start kicking your knees out at this point. They can't argue the way they might. Well, I think this, I think that. You're going to bring facts. The only thing they can do now to hold their opinion, which they're stuck in, is to deny reality.
Yeah, this is called. Yeah, Robert Hanna was talking about this the other day. He just wrote me an email about it. It's called like the backlash effect or the kickback effect. I showed him this video. You've probably seen it. It's going around. There's a black guy, pumped up, shaved head, wearing a white power T-shirt, attacking an old Vietnam vet who has an Antifa loves you sign, who's acting in a very friendly, non-aggressive way. And this guy's like, you motherfucking bastards, I mean, he was praying, dying that he would move in a way or gesture in a way that would allow him to beat the shit out of him, probably to death. And the cops are watching this. They're like, yeah, go get him. Nothing's better than a black guy that joined the Republicans acting like he wants to kill these guys. Don't tell me what to think. All you liberals are trying to liberate me. That's so condescending. So he was like a Fox News wet dream. And so the puzzle was, how do you talk to someone like this black guy? How are you going to say, white power people actually, white power isn't just a slogan. I mean, how do you talk to them?
I usually go gauge his crazy on a scale from 1 to 100, and I go like 10% higher.
That's a Scientology principle. In order to convince anyone of anything, you find their tone on the tone scale and you go one above it.
Yeah, or like if he's looking at me a little like this, I go googly eye. Like, oh yeah, like it's like, and he won't just, it's like he can't worry that my attention is on him because he'll think I'm crazy. So this will relax him a little bit. It's like, this guy's no threat. Start there.
Yes, that's right. Well, this was Steve. So Steve Tobenak is the one that I showed the video to first, and I said, "How do you deal with this, Steve? I mean, come on, give me a good answer." And he's like, the best thing to do is to show that you're not threatening and open to dialogue and agree with them a lot at the beginning.
And also really speak like deep truth to him while you're doing this. Like call the obvious bullshit in a way like a crazy person is just pointing out the bullshit. And it's like, it's totally disarming. Like, why is this crazy guy saying this weird stuff that I can't argue? It's like, it's one way in. Quote Kant to him. Like, what the fuck? This guy said.
I see. Yeah, that's okay. That's called the Tony Robbins method. What you do is you shake the person out of their state by doing something unexpected. It changes the context of the conversation. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Cheer them up too.
But I think to move on what Scott was saying about that, because that maneuver with Tobenak, I know Tobenak as well, and I think it's actually a good approach because I think of it's a form of rhetoric in a way. I mean, you're not trying to give up an inch in terms of knowledge or but you realize that there's a certain limit that can be absorbed by somebody, and when people are abrasive, both sides are abrasive, or you're viewed as threatening, there's no chance of information transmission at all. And so,
if they know that you're right and that you're educated and level-headed, then it's really it's full of all sorts of problems from the get-go. It's like, oh, they're not going to put themselves. They won't create a context of discussion because they'll lose that. They have to create a context of, did you touch me? Did you touch me? Anything except conversation they'll do to start things off.
Yeah.
Anyway,
there's a lot smarter than I am. I mean, when I'm in that situation, I just walk away. Like
we probably got beat up more than you did, which was surprising. But I mean, that's the only place I've learned this stuff.
Well, I thought it'd be fun tonight if we were more artistic and creative, and we started off with something hilarious. So I happen to be an addict of like early 70s commercials, just because it makes me feel superior, because you can see how plainly, obviously, like shittily manipulative they are. And there are so many. I mean, so I have like a library of like maybe 1,000 commercials from 1971. For me, that's like the golden age of shitty commercials. So there's one commercial here that talks about power, and I thought that I would share that.
Cool.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think I'm 10 years older than you.
All right, friends, today's encounter group will be devoted to Charles Smith.
Well, I don't know what it is, but I just can't identify with Charlie.
I know what it is. Charles is a creep.
Marianne, you're overreacting. You see, what you mean is that Charles has little or no ego stripping.
Oh, I've seen broccoli with more personality.
Exactly.
Personality vacuum.
Perhaps he needs something to crystallize his identity, a real drive to find himself.
Charles lacks aggression.
An object, perhaps. Something that will give him an inner source of power, an inner richness.
Well, I think he's got the makings of a wonderful human being.
Mustang announces the new 1971 Charlie Smith. Proud new profile, quiet sense of power.
Personally speaking, today has been a very valuable encounter for you, Charlie.
Mustang, it's a personal thing.
Notice how everybody in the room started changing and complimenting him. Like their whole group perception.
It's a commercial that I think it's the first postmodern like telling on itself commercial. Because I mean, I've never seen a commercial that tells us like, here's how you manipulate people in a really cheesy, obvious, almost didactic way, and we're gonna like take you through like an object lesson in manipulation, and then that's the commercial.
Yeah. Well, Scott, so let's build on this. I mean, salespeople, I've heard that salespeople are the ones that like to be sold to the most. They know they're being sold to. They just can't help know what's going on, right?
Yeah, maybe because they appreciate the art. America's like a good con, and they like to see a good con go down. Like in New York City, the people that do the shell game. Well, here's a true story. This is the most embarrassing story I have. So I just met a girl. I was visiting my friend in Brooklyn, and he was studying at Pratt. He was doing design, and then he was friends with some a Japanese girl, and she had a Japanese girlfriend. And I have like an Asian fetish. So I was like, let's go out. I'll show you around town, and I'll show you up with my white knowledge about all the white things in New York. So we're going out on a date, and I was like, this is the famous shell game in downtown Manhattan. Here's where stupid people get conned out of their money with these clever street folk. And we walk over there, and they're doing the shell game, and I never actually watched them, so I didn't know how it worked. So this actually happened. So he does the thing, and then the guy loses his money, and then I saw where the ball was, and then the guy turns to me, he's like, oh, I didn't see you there. Well, how strange, there's a person here. By the way, just out of curiosity, if you were, I know you're not playing, but if you were to guess which shell it was under, just which one is it? And I was like, well, it's the middle one. And he's like, oh my God, it is. And he just put $200 in my hand. And then I was like, holy shit. I was like, what's going on? And then he's like, oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I can't, according to the rules, I'm not allowed to give you the 200 until you give me 80 first, because you needed to have bet on the thing in order for the bet to be a bet. And I was like, okay, I gave him $80. And then by that time they had moved the little ball, and then I lost the money. And I was like, I was the guy that I was trying to make fun of when I brought this girl over here to show off. And it was just the worst possible thing.
Oh, right. He totally gamed you. He doubled down.
We're going to see a naive country bumpkin get ripped off. Come on, let's go check it out. Anyway, yeah, that actually happened. Okay, all right. Well, let's start off an actual video here.
Never heard of that double game. That's cool. That's amazing.
God.
What aids there were to lighten labor were immemorial, like the mill, which was already ancient in Chaucer's time. The Industrial Revolution began with such machines. The millwrights were the engineers of the coming age. James Brindley of Staffordshire started his self-made career in 1733 by working at mill wheels. Brindley's improvements were practical, to sharpen and step up the performance of the water wheel as a machine. It was the first multi-purpose machine for the new industries. Brindley worked, for example, to improve the grinding of flints, which were used in the rising pottery industry.
I'm fascinated by water wheels because for me, it's like a super educational model in itself of the whole idea of work and energy transference and power, because it almost schematizes the situation, doesn't it? You have energy source, which is high level water. You have energy sink, which is low level water. And in order to extract energy, you have to be at the gradient. You have to be in the gradient of movement to extract it. And there's the wheel picking it up, literally picking it up. And that's, by the way, that's how Earth collects its energy. It's not because there's heat around. It's because there's a transition from energy source to energy sink. And we're being skimmed by the light on that transition, on the gradient. So the movement of sunlight down the hill across the Earth's surface is the same thing that's happening with the water wheel. And so water wheels for me are just like, they're like objects of worship, because all of life gathers around the water wheel. The heat vents under the ocean, that's another energy source, energy gradient, and little animals grow up right by it. So we all gather around the fire of the water wheel, which is the mechanical energy gradient.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, I think he didn't tell another part of it. I think he did tell it later, but he didn't tell it at that moment. That depending on what the culture valued about the water wheel, the Romans had water wheels. In fact, they had even kind of manufacturing, but the Romans were not interested in that so much. They did have it. They produced it, and they used it mechanically to
right, yes.
do all these things.
Yeah,
but the Romans were interested in empire and conquest. So the fact is that England was at that time, the way he explained it was good, but that was later on, they were interested in the material world of producing things. And so although they were also interested in empire, the empire itself was constructed to, in a sense, get goods to produce things. So therefore, the cultural conditions is what actually produced the Industrial Revolution, because the Roman could have done that if they wanted to, but they were interested in conquest.
Yes, and I think that's an excellent point. And that's this whole series is that very point, isn't it? It's showing how cultural conditions produce scientific effects, which in turn feed back on the cultural self-consciousness and create like new metaphysics or a self-identity. So the Romans, they had a value extraction process. It was the empire, but it's very costly because it requires boats and captains and all this stuff. But look, a river is like a concentrated direct tap access to pure power in abstract form. So now power is suddenly abstract. You don't need to have slave ships anymore. It's amazing.
Right. And you don't have to send men down, and you don't have to beat other people down. You just offer them pottery and all your merchandise, and you take from them because you've got the power to build it. And you set up the infrastructure so that the building is way efficient where you are, and no one else has that infrastructure. So
I'm lagging behind here a little bit. I want to spend some time on this idea that culture will shape around the technology. Am I understanding that the way you guys explain that?
To me, at least partially, that's true. It creates a feedback loop. Remember the Romans. Well, they were interested in empire, but they were also in some ways interested in the Greek philosophies. Okay, in a sense to support a kind of more metaphysical understanding of the world. So they never really totally took the science to that degree about the material relationships, because they had all the materials they needed, they wanted, because they had aqueducts, they had all that stuff to take care of things, but they had to defend the empire. That was the thing they were interested in, and so therefore they didn't develop the physical science because they were trapped in the full element idea,
And the culture here is different. Remember, the beginning of capitalism is the beginning of kicking people off their land and making public lands illegal. So back in the old days, there used to be something called public land, and you can go in there and you can take wood for fire and you can get squirrels for squirrel meat. But then when capitalism came in, they realized, geez, how are we going to coerce people into our factories? Which in a way is a good thing besides being miserable. In a way, it's good because it produces massive invention and interaction and higher productivity and efficiency. But how do we get there? The answer is, well, you have to kick people off their land and threaten them. So they literally pushed humanity off to the shores of Europe, took the land, and that's what prevented this thing. Well, here's a funny story. So the public lands used to be open and free. So when they first wrote these laws that made the lands illegal, I know you probably know this funny story. The signs when you entered the forest said 1 log, 1 hand, 2 logs, 1 life. So if you were caught taking a piece of wood, in other words, bypassing capital and getting it for yourself, then they would chop off your hand. But if you took 2 pieces of wood, they wouldn't chop off 2 hands. They would kill you. So this is how you get people from like free-willed, inefficient humans to being good, mechanized Charlie Chaplin, machine-tied humans to being hyper-productive. And also you get people that are between working and ruling classes that are inventors and thinkers and all this stuff. So that's a social infrastructure that produces a new interest in like this interest in abstract power.
Scott.
Scott was saying before, in answer, I think, to Daniel's question, was that the culture transforms the technology based on what the culture is seeking. And there's no doubt that there's the second thing, which is the change in technology retransforms the options in the culture. But if at this point we're looking at mercantile relations and manufacturing in the remote parts of the country as being extremely powerful, despite the power structure in London, this mercantile power is what is driving them forward. And the Romans didn't use the same technology was there. They didn't develop it to the industrial level because they didn't have the same cultural value at that moment, which was, let's develop our mercantile capabilities. We're going to start using the iron to create giant ways of transporting everything. We're going to take nature and restructure nature. They didn't build the aqueducts. They didn't go to the next level, right?
But Borowski covered that when he talked about Venice, right? It was really trade and the rise of trade and the middle class that eventually changed to political power. So it was in some ways, if you look at it this way, in some sense, you would say the elimination of the aristocracy was actually could be considered a bad thing, because under the feudal system, the peasants actually had some rights to the land, right? because they worked the land and they had some right, they will exploit it. But in this situation, they would just kick off the land. So now you have to go to the city because they needed you to work in the cities.
Yeah, but his point is how productive this was. It was good for every household, that it improved the life at the lowest levels, right? Now, you may not look at it as a freedom value, right? But the productivity of this thing was enormous.
Well, Bernowski does a good, I'm sorry, again.
Yeah, no, go on.
Bernowski presents both sides. He looked just like Marx. Marx says precisely, he goes, it was the worst thing that ever happened, capitalism, and it was the best thing that ever happened simultaneously. So as far as like human living conditions for workers, it was the worst thing that ever happened. But as far as cotton underwear and soap, like he says, right, and then metal bed frames, it was the best thing that ever happened. It really, so now you have factories that mass produce stuff. So now everyone can have penny products, you know.
You're not sleeping on the floor. You're not getting as sick. You know, it's better than medicine, he says.
Right.
Well, depends how far you buy into it. I mean, in other words, you're in a sense being bought off. You're being bought off by the goods.
With
and
food
now people are complaining. Now people are complaining that perhaps we live too much in the material world. It's controlling us. But in fact, that's what they want.
Well, yeah, they're saturated now. We've like certain needs are met in certain first world countries. So now there's other things to worry. It's like Maslow's hierarchy still applies, you know. So sure, now I have enough stuff, but my life is meaningless, and so capitalism meets that by giving us video games and Prozac and stuff like that. But what would really make us happy is better social relations, because you know the human organism can't be satisfied in this mechanical way.
Well, we have the abstract Maslow layers of needs, which are built by capitalism, where you're prompted to need more by being shown what other people have and you should potentially have, right?
Yeah, like hissless music. This is Rick Roderick's favorite. No one really was bothered by hissless music. I mean, people had when it was like the 10th generation audio cassette, then it was annoying. But CDs created a new desire, the desire for hissless music. Hula hoops. There were no marches and protests demanding hula hoops. So capitalism wasn't meeting a need. It created the need for hula hoops. So this is the abstract, artificial Maslow that David was talking about.
You guys, I want to take a little bit of an anti-Marxist kind of perspective here on this, right? Because and I do come at this mainly from a student. I like what Scott says about it gave us the best system and it gave us the worst system. I mean, I'll go with that from a starting point. But this idea of in a like a non-capitalist society, that there's no structured sort of the guy down the street holds a position that's better and I'm envious of that position and I want to try and get some sort of upward mobility in influence, in resources. I'm like, that's a load of horseshit if you don't think that happens in a non-capitalistic society, right?
It does. Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, micro envy and micro desires, those are all already there. But to make that like the overall theme of a society, that's not necessary. That's a choice. If you go to Northern Europe, they have other values. They really care about like social harmony and like non-crime. Yeah. They think that murder is actually bad. In America, it's like, yeah, how many people was it today? Only 20. And it's totally. I mean, the different cultures have different value systems. But it's good to have factories that produce masses of stuff, so everyone has cups and plates. Totally.
Well, I think he overstressed one sort of power, the power to produce material culture. But on the other hand, I think he didn't pay enough attention, in my mind, to the fact that the power in politics also recreates that, right? In other words, you finally end up having, in a sense, create a structure in which individuals have power, which is just like, in a sense, like the Middle Ages, in a sense, because in some sense, it's just one class taking over another class.
I think his argument about this was it was very much a leveling. It was a taking away from the aristocracy by giving to people who did things in the material world, not based on birth, but based on moving objects around and building structures and manipulating nature's power, which was available to almost everyone who had, land and waterfalls.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, in this transitional period from mercantile to industrial, like David said, it really is a kind of automatic meritocracy, like maybe accidentally. But in this system, the reward was moving from people that didn't deserve it, like you did nothing but be born, to people that actually had talents and skills that were doing what? Making more use values and transporting the use values and actually providing. It's like providing. These were like aqueducts of pure value, like spreading all over the land.
And when Galileo did that, his spyglass may have benefited, the merchant, people who were managing the docks in Venice and all that, but he didn't really get power out of it. He got shut down by the power when he really came out to speak about his ideas. And here it's like, no, the power is really shifting. Because the material.
I disagree with that because, for instance, with the French Revolution, I mean, the liberalism was really a twin freedom of capital and a freedom of the human spirit, and we didn't respect and understood enough. There were people who did not respect the human spirit; they just want to take, and so therefore it didn't take long for Napoleon to catch power and restructure the system that's supposed to be liberating you.
But he was like a Roman general. He was like out of place. He came in, he was running wars. He was not the right person to be put into the structure. Yeah. They had to get rid of him. They got rid, it took a while.
Well, that's an interesting point, Phil. I wonder, because you're right, those first pronouncements about liberty, dignity, and equality and fraternity were actually came alongside like the property rights based type of pronouncements. So Locke made like equality, freedom, and all this stuff. He tied it to property. Remember, was Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke were the ones that tried to like give a rational account of rights and all this stuff. And you're right, the property, the property and these values, like the French liberal values, they came up together, and I wonder what the real connection is.
Oh, they were trying to maintain their property and the property of their cohort. Yeah, it was really equality among us.
Right away. That's the question I asked in the Oath of the Tennis Court. How many people in the Bastille was in the Oath of the Tennis Court?
Look, I'm going to say something that what Locke comes up with and the property rights are the basis of tort law. It seems to me to be a very stabilizing factor in society. I can't say that definitively. But the idea of the French Revolution, or the idea of revolution in general, which would probably be pretty good to play that clip because it was one on revolution, is you have this this mechanism of complete upheaval, right? And so it was trying to take an idea of, this is my property and I'm going to take it from you for the good of society. This is horrific to me, right? I think it ends in such disaster every time, whether it's the French Revolution or whether it's, I think it was Mao's China. It's like, let's move the middle class. Let's just throw them out to the countryside. We'll check on them in a month. Oh, fuck, they're eating each other.
Well, wait a minute. You forgot even a more important thing. I mean, the deep argument for taking over the American Indians, although Locke didn't do it, but the philosophy allowed that, is the Indians live on the land, they live off the land, they never work the land. Yeah. They never own the land, so it's free land for the taking. But there was an inner circle of, let's say, white explorers, because these Indians worked in a different system. There's a system where you share things with other tribes, because they took care of the land so that you could roam free and enjoy the strawberries or whatever.
Who was the guy that said that working on something like imbues a kind of phlogiston magic into it? Was that Locke or Smith? Like once you work on something, it becomes yours because you've imbued it with this essence. Who was that?
I think it might be Locke. Certainly it fits with Locke because it's essentially a Protestant ethic. You're thrown out of the Garden of Eden. You have to work your way back to the garden. I mean, it's in a sense, so work became a central thing rather than, in a sense, being handed down by the church from God. you have to work and make a connection to God itself. So in some sense, work was a very important thing in terms of develop commerce.
Yeah. It has like an inbuilt sort of aestheticism too to it, and it's like, yes, those are good old hardworking values. But look, I want to bring a question up. Remember the previous episode where he was talking, Bronowski was talking about Isaac Newton, and Isaac Newton could not get a post because he was what religious background? Unitarian, right? So what was it? Was it Unitarian and Protestant? What was the, and like, who was the meritocracy or the church, the ideology that won out in Newton's time?
Jeez, I guess it would be
COE?
Anglican, right? Anglican, Lutheran, and then those Anglican, Lutheran, and Calvin. Those were the dominant Protestantisms.
Yeah. I think the Unitarians, in a sense, were part of the reason why they came to America is because they were
segregated, right?
Unitarians were just rationalists.
Yeah.
It's just like they were just normal, like level-headed monists. They would have had the courage to apply common sense to like metaphysics. Like, how could it really be three and one simultaneously?
Well, if you look at the churches, I mean, they were very stark and sort of minimal. I mean, it's like it wasn't excess.
Yes, that's another interesting thing. I took a class on this. It was a 17th century German fetish of the text that created this Protestant movement, that the idea that the text fell from the sky and it was never sullied by human intervention, unlike those sick Catholics with their Mary worship and all their materiality, their incense and all this crap, the Eucharist. It's so disgusting, right? It's like an Islamic repulsion against the material and the representative. So the Protestants were like, only the text is pure. So let's just clear everything out. We're going to turn the churches into sparse warehouses, and we're just going to drink in the pure text. The text is the pure thing. Everything else is garbage. Yeah, that was a German thing, but it was very popular. I guess because text language is a important aspect of philosophy and meaning.
What was that movement called? Do you know?
Oh, the German text worship.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I remember. But I thought that was interesting because it was the northern text worshiping Germans versus these sensual Italian woman lovers and all their disgusting biscuit eating and incense and all this stuff. Yeah, I
would say Martin Luther, though, guys.
Yeah,
it's the Vulgate. It's bringing it up from the ground and giving that person from the substrate of the commoner the power of the word, and that's I would guess.
It certainly is some form of Protestantism because at the Catholic Church at that point began to mediate so much in the Word of God that in a sense a church had the power where the Protestants were essentially saying, no, we all have a direct line to God.
Right.
Every man is his own priest. That's right. Yeah.
Every individual can read scripture.
All right, let's try the next clip here because I don't want everyone to get. So this is probably my favorite clip in the whole series because I love the scene from Blade Runner where they where you remember J.F. Sebastian, the guy that made the robots in Blade Runner.
Yeah.
So this is the J.F. Sebastian paradise scene here.
For example, the French and the Swiss were quite as clever as the English and much more ingenious in making scientific playthings. But they lavished that clockwork brilliance on making toys for rich or royal patrons.
Look, it's breathing.
It's a heaving bosom.
The French were the inventors of automation. That is, making each step in a sequence of movements control the next. fine skill of this kind could advance a man in France. A watchmaker, Pierre Caron, who pleased the Queen, became Count Beaumarchais. And he later wrote the play on which Mozart based his opera, The Marriage of Figaro.
So, besides being a lovely, incredible sequence, and besides everyone loving those automatons, and especially Ken Russell. Remember, he really showcases them in his movie Gothic, which is about Mary Shelley, but also about this age of automation. But the reason I love this clip is because that guy Pierre Caron made a little robot version of himself riding Figaro, which is like, that's the end of history. That's the singularity, because now he's immortal as a version of himself doing his greatest thing, just like we're going to be immortal on Facebook with our manicured avatars forever, even after we die. So he was the first uploader of self into immortal material.
That's
I thought he was a little bit unfair, though. I mean, I enjoy that clip as well. It shows the difference between the French and the English. But he was a little bit unfair, because instead of showing that, he should have shown how the French used that digital system to create a new kind of loom for production. I mean, because that was actually a computerized system in punch cards that allowed them to weave, mechanically weave things. So that was also driven by production as well. So yes, they do have, the French always had that other thing, even with words. They're just so sophisticated in words that, you get almost trapped inside the words rather than the ideas.
It's funny. It reminded me of the Astrolabe and the Swiss Clockworks. I didn't think it was specifically French, but the idea that they did this automation in these highly complex sequences meant that they could use it in manufacturing. You're right. He didn't develop that idea. Have you ever seen one of those dolls? As a kid, I couldn't believe it. They have one at the Franklin Institute. It's like, something's fake going on here.
Guys, I have to point out, like, what time period are we looking at here?
1780.
I think that,
because here's the thing, is that I think there's an origin, and a French origin story that we all know that predates this, from that mechanical thing. I mean, Descartes was very much into the mechanics of how things operated, right?
Yes.
Louis
Hobbes conceived of the self precisely as a machine.
Yeah. So we have, and then also, which Louis was it that had his gardens with all the mechanized, types of animals and stuff moving around, right? This was the idea where we could kill dogs because we had no idea, that we didn't think they felt pain. We thought it was just some sort of mechanical device.
Like those birds. Yeah, you're right. And Descartes kind of redefined mathematically what constituted a constructible geometric object, whereas it used to only be, you had a compass and a straight edge. He said, if I can connect, bars together and jimmy a mechanism, then I can, and all of a sudden now they're cubic curves. You can make any polynomial graph, and he was solving equations with these things. And, of course, they also had the algebra at that point. So he was combining. He didn't actually draw the X and Y axes, it's true, but he labeled things as X's and solved them in terms of each other, going out of the geometry, using just the abstract algebra and coming back in to make it mean something. So he was doing the conceptual work. It was like, how could you compare X squared and X? An area, how can you compare? Because they didn't used to have these things as they weren't numbers, they were geometric things. X squared meant this by this. So how could you compare that to a straight line? You can't add a line to a square. And he realized, well, X can be taken as, with a unit side, a measure of area too. Now you can have a polynomial. You can mix any powers together. It meant something geometric fully, but he totally abstracted it. I don't know if that comes into this.
I think it's the beautiful explanation, David. I think that's really, I think it's beautiful. I mean, not only the explanation, but
he's a genius.
That's my favorite peak. You know, the intellectual peaks in history, because that actually, I don't know, that's my dissertation topic, was the combination of algebra and geometry and analytic geometry, because Kant's table of judgment is actually a table of metaphysics based on the T F of T relation. I just solved that problem.
Mm-hmm. Why is it when the calendar flips from 1700 to 1800, it's like the end? That's it. That was the greatest thinking. That's all. I mean, you know, there has been some thinking, but it was just an incredible period. I mean, we went from Mozart to Beethoven, and it's like, okay, nothing's ever going to happen like that again. And he's always using Beethoven as the underlying music in this segment. I'm noticing that he's he's grabbing later music, which is the final development of this powered nature human, you know, romance, to go back to what's really Mozart's era, and Ben Franklin and Mozart, not Ben Franklin, Beethoven. So he's like,
no. I think you got that you miscast it. I think he brought in Beethoven when he was talking about the Romantics and how they were actually expressing the 19th century, which was moving deep into the Industrial Revolution. He actually talked about Mozart before that.
Yeah, but when he plays this dramatic music, he's always using the eroica.
That's right. That's a good point. I just realized that this episode actually encompasses multiple eras. So there's the era of like property rights, capitalism, and gathering humans in factories and inventions. And then this leads to the great revelation of the fungibility of power. And then that leads to this like metaphysical, mystical revelation that external and interior, like vital force power, are one and the same. And that's the romantic thing at the end. That's the climax.
Well, I think the fact that he used eroica was a very, very important. I don't know whether he intended to do that, because the Third Symphony, which is eroica, was the symphony, I think, is one of his best, probably second only to the Ninth Symphony. Was one of his best because that's when he became Beethoven. If you listen to the two previous symphonies, you didn't know it was Beethoven, you ask somebody, who is this? They will think I think that's Mozart. It's so much Mozart in it. He actually became Beethoven in the Third Symphony. The other thing that's important about that, maybe he's setting it up for a later episode, was that Beethoven had dedicated the Eroica Symphony to Napoleon, because he thought Napoleon was changing society, revolutionary. And when Beethoven began to show himself as a dictator, Beethoven actually, well, they said that he ripped up, but he didn't. He just undedicated that symphony so Beethoven had recognized that the revolution that was produced eventually would actually produce Napoleon.
Yeah, but still, that's why it's so weird that he's using Beethoven, because that's all in the 1800s. Here we are back in the 1780s, and he's playing that music as part of the industrialization. It's really weird for that juxtaposition when you know it's really the romantic spirit that he's portraying in that music with that power. It's just funny. It was funny to me. But I'm sure he knew what he was doing. This guy, he knows the details. Yeah. I don't know why he did it, but he knows. Scott is trying to say something.
But he's just...
what a coincidence, Phil. Your distinction between the not yet Beethoven-y Beethoven and the later Beethoven, who I would like to describe, it just came to me now, as forward and thrusting. And we can now play the forward and thrusting clip, which is very pleasant. I just like that. I think he did a good job when he went down that adjective highway. Here we go.
Satire is not a social dynamite, but it is a social indicator. It shows that new men are knocking at the door. What made Napoleon call the last act of the play the revolution in action? It was Beaumarchais himself, in the person of Figaro, pointing to the Count and saying, because you're a great nobleman, you think you're a great genius. You have taken trouble with nothing except to be born. Beaumarchais represented a different aristocracy of working talent. The watchmakers in his age, the masons in the past, the printers. What excited Mozart about the play. The revolutionary ardor which to him was represented by the movement of Freemasons. Or think of the greatest Freemason of them all in that age, the printer, Benjamin Franklin. He was American emissary here in France at the court of Louis XVI in 1784 when the Marriage of Figaro was first performed. And he, more than anyone else, represents those forward-looking, forceful, confident, thrusting, marching men who made the new age.
Oh, so I didn't know that Freemasons were these. They were These guys were like polymaths, but they were like utilitarian polymaths. They were putting their skills and talents to good use. And so Mozart was interested in this distinction between status that used to be based on birth and this new status, which is based on guys that are really smart and making lots of use values and helping out people. It was this social duty thing, and it must have seemed really great. And that's the hero of Beethoven, the new human that's like, I'm a Prometheus, and I'm gonna suffer and actually put forth effort to help the people in this Benthamian, Millian, Spockian helping of all. It's really lovely.
Do you say Beethoven you thought was doing that? Or he expressed the sentiment in the music? Yeah. Are you saying he was actually doing it?
Well, he's referring in Figaro here because the character Figaro in the final scene is the beginning of the revolution. So he's saying it presupposed it was actually that piece of culture that did it. Now, I want to do a comparison to something contemporary here for just a minute, okay? If we say, where's the revolution happening in the classes that we see now? Like who would be, is it the visible minority class that's fighting for, gender equality or equality of outcomes? Like, what would we make the comparison to? Because, and before I pass that question off, we have to label this portion that Scott was just talking about as the mercantile, artisan production class that was looking, as Brunowski said, why are you better than me? Because you were simply born? Right? So what class is that compared to today's age, would you guys say?
I think it's hugely happening, but I don't think it's singular. I think there are these identity groups, and I think each one is laying a claim to existing and being real and saying that we have a status system which is based on an old paradigm. And first of all, we have to recognize racial differences, and then we have to say, and race is a construct, and we have to do, these are dialectical, but we have to do both of them.
Okay.
Well, I'm in a way speaking against myself in this sense because I love classical music. But I think a good argument could be made that popular culture is actually more in tune with the contemporary culture than classical culture, because they are actually speaking in the language of what the general population needs, which is not necessarily the most refined and sophisticated thing, but actually speaking in terms of struggling for power,
Okay, I have to pull the Kim Kardashian card here for a minute.
I thought you were pulling the hip hop card because my kids tell me you must listen to this, and I do, and like most of it I like that. And so somehow maybe this generation we're looking back at not only was breaking barriers, but they were respecting the past that they stood on. And I get the feeling that right now the people breaking barriers are just trashing everything behind them. And I think, hey, boomer, I think it's really wrong to give me respect. I don't respect you. What is that? I think they're not interested in building the way it's been built in a consistent seeming way that there's a system worth maintaining, because it's so perverted. I think that's wrong-sighted because we're standing on shoulders, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The thing for me, culture, I have a very strict definition of what culture is, and it's transmitted through generations. It's the idea. It's the whole string that is cultural evolution, right? And so the way I look at this obliteration of culture this refusal to say, I owe you nothing, my elder. This is the obliteration of culture. This is saying, I need none of that.
Yeah, I'll give you my tiny violin on that, because my heart was broken. I'm kind of holding this Passover Zoom with my, little bits of my family, the people who still talk to me. And, so I have one kid on, and her partner is half Native American. Okay, so we're doing this stuff, and and we're singing songs now. Passover's about going to freedom from Egypt. It's the concept of liberation. So it's a liberation celebration for all cultures. It's a general concept of liberation. If you're not seeing people free, get involved, because look, you can't forget. This is like, really bring this to heart. And so I'm looking for a song. So I want to sing "This Land Is Your Land, This Land Is My Land," and I'm told we can't sing that. It's problematic. Wait a minute. Well, because the land is really the Indian land, as we're talking about. And this is the white people coming and taking the land who are singing this, and said, wait a minute, that is so wrong-headed. This Okie guy, Woody Guthrie, he was not talking on behalf of the power structure. He was opposite. He was fighting the power. He's talking about that sign that Scott talks about is in the song, and it says, on this side, the sign says private property, but on the other side, it doesn't say nothing. Meaning, forget it. That's just a sign. The property is everyone's. But no, it's been, when you throw it all out, because you know how the Native Americans been treated by the white European, taking everything out, and it's horrible. Absolutely, you can't erase history. You have to learn it, but you want to throw it out because you're co-opted and you're living with that. So, it's going to take another generation to get over that.
Yeah, that's right. This is a dream come true for the Republic, is that this identity politics is being somehow connected with Marxism and real social, actually helpful social projects. What a great thing that it's becoming so anal and exaggerated and compensatory. So, there's real problems to be solved, but we can't solve them. So we have to increase all the emphasis on identity politics, and you get these bizarre effects like David is talking about, where actual good lefty songs are now perceived as kind of they're oppressive of the Native Americans. And so it's that's what a victory that is for the people that are actually in power, because it creates a distaste for liberating theory generally.
Well, my opinion to that is that, certainly ever since Galileo, it's not just a matter of tradition, because culture also moves and transforms itself. So there's always a relationship between the past and its movement to the future in a way. So therefore, the past is always begrudging the future to manifest itself, but the future is also part of the past in the sense that it will become part of the past in the future. So modernism, in the deeper sense, since Galileo, has, if you've lost the permanent structure, which is God, the last permanent structure, then in a sense, you always are transforming yourself, because it's about, in a sense, not so much Beethoven's music, which I love, okay? So that's why I'm saying I'm speaking against myself. It's no, it's his spirit of the dynamism of moving. So therefore, in a sense, the new generation is always partly resentful of the past, because they're always holding back what the movement is. So therefore, in a sense, and the difference also is that, in addition to the fact of the past is always suppressed the difference within the culture itself, because it has a dominant culture versus the minority culture. And the minority culture wants to expose itself to become actually part of the promise of what the past had promised, which is sort of the aspiration. Like all constitution has aspiration, but it never manifests itself. That's actually reminding you that you are not even living up to your past.
I agree.
Yeah.
The future has to see itself in time. We have to live backwards as we go in the future and say, what is the future we're creating going to look like? Absolutely. We have to see it in its own rear view and understand, did it take the past into account? Did it respect that? Because we wanted to create something that we're going to respect. Yeah, absolutely. And what happens to time is going to come up in this series as he talks about that a little bit.
That's
Scott,
right.
Is it worth, Scott, bringing up something on Heidegger? I mean, he's just talking about that forward movement, and
actually, that's 2 clips away. But let me just say that this thing that Phil was talking about, this forward moving thing. So when we did our phenomenology of spirit class with Rick Roderick, he wanted us to understand how Hegel was feeling because he was watching the French Revolution and listening to Beethoven while he was writing this, and he really felt that the historical change is like a real power. I mean, now we're living in a televised, kind of tightly controlled info illusion. But back then, you could really see things changing. So this dynamism thing was really it was really present. And what does it feel like to live in a revolutionary time? I mean, it must feel like you must feel like a citizen in a democracy. Like your will is actually part of the total movement. I mean, we don't have that now. We're all spectators. But it's hard. Once upon a time, people felt like that.
I keep thinking about Hegel in this because, like Phil said, God, the absolute, was replaced. According to Hegel, there is still something absolute, which is about direction. What?
So it's important to know that, when Beethoven wrote his music, it was very, very revolutionary about movement and all that. And now it's almost difficult, unless you really love music, to understand that because you could hear Beethoven in elevator music. Yeah. It's become so damn ordinary in one sense that you have to actually be a connoisseur to actually listen to.
That's right. That's the glut aspect of the postmodern condition. Everything equals everything because everything's available on the internet. I mean, Beethoven side by side with plastic dog poop. I mean, they're all together on the same frame.
But it's also that his inventions and surprises are not obviously new to you because you don't see that this was the first time someone did that. So we're not necessarily tuned to the thing he's doing. There's a surprise. Only the slapstick stuff, like ba 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 ba.
I think we can talk to the human propensity towards novelty, right? We always move towards novelty, and so if your parents arrived at a generation where let's just say they pretty much figured it out, well, where do they go from there? Well, let's make it a little better. We could spin that in a different scenario. And my parents were immigrants to a country, right? And they worked so hard and they had even the parents say, I don't want to have my kids have the same difficulties I had, right? They're trying to give their children the better life. But the children are always trying to do something like their parents in a way, but different. They always want to have it different. We don't replicate that way. We replicate to differentiate, to establish our own identity somehow. It's like this constant part of like defining your own legacy, right?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. It's this pure rejection, like David was talking about, like considered progressive emphasis, like listen to this music because, and then something versus just pure difference. Like I need to not be you in some way anyway. That's different from I need to not be like you in these particular ways because I want to improve things.
Well, but that's a problem with revolution in this sense, okay? Revolution always wants to move ahead. But when it moves ahead, it becomes, in some sense, frozen into a sort of like almost a caricature of itself. So you're left with only a kind of memory, objectification of itself. But it was at that moment when it was birthing itself, it was revolutionary because like, wow, I never thought of that. And so therefore, in a sense, you always have to be open enough to understand beyond the identity, there's always a difference that wants to show itself. And I think we have moved to the age where people want to show the difference and expose the difference and say, this is me, and not being forced into an identity of some sort.
Well, I think there's something, this may be crazy, sort of on the other point of view, which is, and the Bible tells these stories about, so Abraham has Isaac, and what is it? Isaac has this sort of like low-level life, and he digs the same wells that his father dug in the same places. He kind of relives all this stuff, even though he's been through this traumatic, life. You'd think he'd avoid everything. We tend to back to our origin family a certain way, repeating some of their objectives and goals, which were set for us as the sort of a horizon. Like, so my father was second generation. He was here, and he was writing, to the Inquirer, talking about, how we're not taking care of social issues, or how come, women don't have rights for abortion or whatever, stuff like that. And we're still fighting the same battles because those were the right battles, So there's a certain amount that we're trying to go forward. And I think when the young generation sees that repeats and repeats, and they go, "Tooey," there's a tendency to throw a lot more out than they realize because they're young, and that's, part of their power and goodness. But, civil rights, and then, after the Reconstruction, and then Jim Crow, and then, civil rights, and then Black Lives Matter, like, Tooey, when are we going to do it?
Yeah.
I got something. So, David, you've got I've got a biblical name, Daniel, right?
Absolutely.
So, this fear and trembling, the lion and I don't know if it was a cave, but how that the wisdom in that story is that, the Daniel archetype, right?
Yeah.
He lets go of all bitterness and all contempt in his heart for his oppressors, right? So this is this freeing sort of thing that is the fear and trembling, like how you have that power, that's, among you to do that, right? And Daniel did it so perfectly. Look, he was unscathed by this fierce beast, right? Sort of thing. So, I remember when I named, my children, and I guess I didn't really follow this rule, but there was a preference that I had about naming, and with kids, I thought to myself, I don't need to name my kid Apple like Gwyneth Paltrow did. I said, there's something kind of cool about like, having a name that means something, right? Has this long tradition of like, they are virtuous. It's cool that my name is Daniel. It doesn't,
absolutely.
It feels good. It feels good that your grandpa tells you that story, right? Or that you have the same name as your grandpa, right? I'm kind of one of those guys that have that little sweet spot, right? It's
a gift. It was a gift that you're connected to your own, family and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. But we don't have that. We don't have that now, and we have a cancel culture. Like they want to erase it and have something brand new, and not. It just seems such an obliteration.
Well, but like Scott said, a little bit of that is the tipping to that level. It's been weaponized. Things that you're doing wrong that one group doesn't want to see, they weaponize it against you. So I think the cancel culture, which supposedly is PC culture to the extreme, is really something that the right is prodding and they're making the embers burn.
Okay, clip time.
It's culture.
The scientific entertainment of the day was electricity. Franklin loved fun. He was a rather improper man, but he took it seriously. He recognized electricity as a force in nature. He proposed that lightning is electric, and in 1752 he proved it. How would a man like Franklin prove it? By hanging a key from a kite in a thunderstorm. Being Franklin, his luck held. The experiment did not kill him, only those who copied it. Of course, he turned the experiment into a practical invention, the lightning conductor, and made it illuminate the theory of electricity, too. Franklin and his friends lived science. It was constantly in their thoughts, and just as constantly in their hands. The understanding of nature to them was an intensely practical pleasure. These were men in society. Franklin was a political man, whether he printed paper money or his endless racy pamphlets. and his politics were as downright as his experiments. Franklin changed the florid opening of the Declaration of Independence to read with simple confidence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal."
So isn't that, I mean, I love cliche. I love one-dimensional cliches because they help you memorize things. So is that the American spirit, this practical, this concern with being practical and kind of like roll up your sleeves or something? Well, that was a silly comment. Here's what I wanted to say. Back in the olden times, electricity was a plaything. There were parties where people would come and dip their arms in these vats of just glass and metal with straws coming out of them, because these guys like Mesmer and other ones, they thought that, well, for a while, first they thought like there was an astral fluid that was what the soul was made of. Then they thought it was magnetism, and then they thought it was electricity, and then it became hypnotism, and eventually became psychotherapy. But for a while, psychotherapy was grappling with the latest model of consciousness. So electricity, besides making these toys, was also seen as like a kind of a drug, and people were actually like holding on to metals and then having real effects because placebo effect is real. So I thought this is the American character fantasy I'm having. So you have all these French people paying lots of money to go to these magnetism parties where they're drinking magnetic soul juice out of a vat in the center of the room. Very popular party pastime. And Franklin's like, screw that. Let's harness this for work. It's like, wow, that must be the American in the room. Anyway, it was just that's how it made me think.
It's a good contrast.
Well, the Americans had to develop a new culture too. In other words, they have this vast wilderness. Whereas the French, and to a degree the English, already had established culture, which could be a base for them. So therefore, they had to be practical. Imagine if you were Daniel Boone or whoever it was, David Crockett, you go out into the forest, and you got to make do with the damn few things you carry with you, the Bowie knife or whatever it is, so you can't just like carry on like one of these toy French machines because like you really like it that come with you. I mean, so you have to be so part of that is really the fact that we have a vast wilderness that we have to conquer.
Yeah, look who our aristocracy is. It's different.
Yeah. That's right. That's Phil. That's great. So I was thinking, yes, everyone knows necessity is another invention. So kind of like wilderness and difficulty promotes creativity. But the American spirit is the guy who's, even when he's at a French salon with people drinking magnetic juice, he's still in that wilderness mode. He's like, how can I maximize utility in this village? It's like he's a hero character. He's like trying to be the most practical thing to connect as many outlets to as many fans as possible. Like bring up those empty buildings and those homeless people together. Come on, let's get going.
I have to do a little interjection and apologize to Scott. I just looked down at my phone and I see his text from 5 o'clock. So sorry about that. But
well, that's a Gary. In line with this talk about being socially minded and in this new hero of utilitarianism, I would like to share.
Societies like the Lunar Society represent the sense of the makers of that revolution, that very English sense, that they had a social responsibility. I call it an English sense, though in fact that's not quite fair. The Lunar Society was much influenced by Benjamin Franklin and by other Americans associated with it. What ran through it was a simple faith. The good life is more than material decency, but the good life must be based on material decency.
Poor Bronowski had no idea how ingenious the Republican marketing branch was to create a society where people would actually fight against welfare and fight against material decency and fight for homelessness. It's a madness. It's a resentment-based political suicide madness that he never imagined.
But they're convincing people that their lives are at stake for some principles which in effect do what you're talking about. They're not selling homelessness. They're saying people will be homeless because they depend on the government, and they're selling this picture of, you know.
It's the welfare mom. It's the lazy grasshopper welfare mom who's just having kids and watching TV. We hate that person. That's what it's based on. Yeah.
Well, isn't that partly also based on meritocracy in this sense, or misuse of meritocracy? I mean, obviously, I'm superior. I deserve more. Those people who are at the bottom, they don't deserve it. You know, like I happen to believe, even if you have that sense, they do deserve something. I mean, that's where the problem is. You know, that so they don't deserve it. That's their own fault. I think that is you could overplay meritocracy as well if you especially if you don't have a heart. You know, so therefore, in a sense,
but in our society isn't based on meritocracy. It's based on they've been downtrodden for hundreds of years.
I understand that, but you could
that's the lie. That's the lie. That it's only their merit that put them down.
I understand, but if you're a person that has privilege, you're going to play up that lie because you know you got what you deserve. You know.
No, your privilege is not knowing that you have privilege, not seeing it, not confronting it. And that's why you can be sold this bill of goods, that they're lazy bums and they get what they deserve. Shouldn't give them anything because they'll get lazier. That's why they're down under you. I mean, like, what? It's a sales trick. I mean, the real American is a sales trick.
But what I'm saying is, yes, it is. But you could use that sales trick easily because you could play up the fact that you've earned everything you deserve. I'm against that, but what I'm saying is you could utilize that in that sense, you know. And some of them did actually. Well, they didn't deserve as much as they got, but they did work hard for it, you know. So there's some truth at some level.
Rich people today are rich, but 99% of the rich today are rich because, just like the nobility, they were born in the right family. Yeah. That's it. That's all Donald Trump. What virtues or skills or talents got Donald Trump his $400 million minus $300 million in debt? Where did he get that money from? From his skills? No, by birth. And it's just the same thing as nobility.
Yeah, there's also a structure in capitalism that allows the accumulation. So that Jeff Bezos didn't work his way up there by doing 1 million times more work, but by manipulating the channels of power, which is where the money flows. And
you don't have to convince me because I agree with everything you're saying. But it goes back to my original question: who was at the oath of the tennis court? From the very beginning, it was that way.
Who was at the tennis court with Marie Antoinette?
The oath of the tennis court is when the middle class fought for the delegation to represent the new constitution, and they were all the landed gentry. And they never thought about the peasants.
Well, they were afraid of something we pointed out, which was, I mean, there's still a balance. You don't want to give all the people all the power because you want someone who remembers the way things were and was educated. So actually, there was a value in the nobility that they got trained in all the skills. So you actually needed their history too. You can't just throw it all out. You have to find a way to mix it together and have representatives who will stand there. And at first they were afraid to let all the representatives be elected. You know, we're heading maybe towards a democracy if we don't blow it, right?
So sounds a lot like the communists. You know, we have the temporary elite to lead the government, eventually become a kind of material democracy, right? It sounds a whole hell of a lot like that.
But there is such a thing as merit. So we don't want to deny that.
No. I agree with you. There is merit, but what I'm saying is you could overuse that argument because from the very beginning it was not about that. You exclude certain people from the very beginning.
Right. So how do you accomplish the right balance?
Yeah, that's a good point. So merit really exists, but you could lie about it and say merit. Whatever. Maybe it's an invisible metaphysical merit, but that's the reason I have money and you don't.
That's it.
All right, speaking of merit. That's helpful to know. So a quantitative difference, which is the speed of body motion inside the factory, created a qualitative difference of immiseration that I guess would be hard to guess. And
it's driven by an inhuman force. It could have been done with water, but now with steam, it runs no matter what, and it can be transported anywhere. So you can do this, even when there's no water. The source of power is like unlimited. And what you have is in society, if you think about the generations, our intention controls more and more power at once. The Romans could, even the Egyptians, you could move stones with a huge number of people, but you really didn't have mechanical energy that was inexhaustible. You could tilt something and it would fall, and that was it. And now to harness this building power and to be able to direct it with governors and transmissions with your intent and turn it on and off, and finally getting the chemical energy and nuclear energy. Our little minds with our little idea, the ends that we're setting, and to have that much power, that's our progress. It's something that's really dangerous, isn't it? It's just scary. It's an amplification of whatever we intend, multiplied by that degree of power, which is now 10 to the what compared to what it used to be. It's really scary.
You got to write that down, David. That was well said.
Yeah.
It's straight out there. It's like, there it is. It's in the ether.
so here you have the owners owning water power or steam power, and they can turn it on and leave it on, and then it's up to the workers to keep up with it. And if they don't, then they don't have a job. So what an exhilarating, intoxicating position that is, to be in, to have an infinite power switch to say, hey, you worker ants, gather around that, and then somehow be translators for that steam into these objects that we're making here in the factory. And if you can't keep up with it, then you die and I replace you.
Right, and it's the master-slave relationship with a different degree of power that you're demanding out of the worker, which is inhuman, right?
Well, the thought I was thinking of is that the new change, the new terraforming effect that's going to happen with this new digitization and information overload.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I call it the information overlord, right? But what is, like, Yuval Noah Harari will call it the useless class. People just, there's no use for them. And so what does that do to a society? Do we do the right thing and prop them up? There seems to be no other option. You can't even tell them to go work hard and pull them out of poverty because there's nothing for them to do.
But don't
I say that if those monkeys can't dance to the tune of those fast machines, I say we exterminate them, and then maybe genetically engineer people that don't have individual wills and that are entirely happy to be means for the capitalist ends. I think that would solve the problem.
I think the problem is that we thought we solved the power equation through the materials. I think we went out of balance. We overbalanced with materialism, and I think the old values of virtue, however you want to take it, or ethics, if you want to put it in a different way, has been lost to a degree. There was always that sense of virtue, even though it was abused in the old culture as well, that the Greeks certainly were concerned with. And I think that we went too far. And at first it seems good because it seems very rewarding. And he made a good argument, like the poor people, they had what appeared to be a miserable life, but in fact was good because they had soap, they had a room, they had these things, and so what it became was a replacement of quantity versus quality. And so therefore, in a sense, we were slowly bought off because we got used to that as being the reward, but it turns out it's not. And it's time to bring that at least back in the balance, that there is actually another value that we have to bring back, which is virtue, which builds community and understandings of others and appreciating their life as well as animals. we've completely disrespected other living things.
It's hard to believe that, that we could lose track of those exact values. It's sort of funny, but I think it has to do with the material being this clanking, loud, noisy thing, which the more material comes, the more piles in. It overwhelms you sensually to the point that you're almost not living at the level where you're reduced to bare things and you're taking care of each other. You're overwhelmed by the physical. And that's part of, I think, the salesmanship of it. People needing their earplugs in and walking around not looking at nature and doing all this. It's very compelling, but it's hypnotizing. Why are we losing touch with our sensuous bodily physical being, which we love in other people, which is real? What you're talking about is morality.
For Sartrean reasons, we hate freedom, and we hate the fact that we're basically empty of essential nature. We love knowing things and pinning things down. And so one way to lose the anxiety of being a free subject is to overwhelm yourself to a point of non-existence. Sartre called it bad faith, right? You hook yourself up to as many external bullshit, trivial baubles and obligations as possible, and then you're no longer there. You're so busy with the calendar that you don't have time to feel the inherent anxiety of being a subject.
Well, particularly Western ideas has been too mesmerized by measurements. I think it's easier to measure the material world, at least to a certain degree. We still don't know what infinity is, but it's just much harder to measure quality. I mean, how the hell do you measure that? You have to have a judgment. You have to
wait.
You have to make a kind of.
Why are you measuring it? You don't want to measure it. That's the wrong. You want the quality, not the measure.
I understand. But if you fall into hypnosis, under everything should be measurable, then in a sense it's very difficult, because that kind of measurement, at the very least, has to go through a judgment. Like, oh yeah, that's beautiful music. Well, it's because it's louder. What is it? It's just more complicated. We have to think of the quantity. Sometimes cannot be measured. It has to be felt and judged.
Right. The abstraction of it to quantity is a mistake when it's a quality.
That's right.
I think Ginny has something to say.
Hey, Ginny. Hey.
Hey, Jenny.
How are you? Scott, is there two of you in here today?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm so lonely by myself here that I've duplicated myself electronically, and I brought my doppelganger with me today.
Yeah, because also you look like you're muted, and I can hear you. I find that interesting.
That is true.
Huh?
You look like you're muted, and yet I can hear you.
No, he took away the mute thing. Look at that.
I'm doing this because I heard rumor has it that there's an echo sometimes. So I've learned to mute myself as often as possible.
Oh, okay. So you're going back and forth, back and forth. I thought you just had this technical magic. You can mute yourself and yet and be heard. Today people are just amazing how technical they are, tech savvy they are. No, please go on. I'm listening.
So I know this is very predictable. I know what all of you're thinking right now. I know what you're expecting me to show you next, and I guess I'm going to show you. So don't be mad just because you knew this was going to happen. I'm doing the totally boring expected thing. So here's the thing that everyone knows is going to happen next. I mean, so don't be mad at me. I don't want to be so predictable. Here we go. Oops. God damn it. After that really exciting intro, I screwed it all up. Here we go.
Oh yeah,
that's a wonderful movie.
Yeah, so that's the clip that Rick Roderick would always bring up when he talked about this difference in speed. Like so capitalism created a difference in proximity. You had many people together in a small space working together, which actually helped create labor unions and class consciousness. But there was also the speed problem.
Oh, isn't showbiz wonderful? What would you do without showbiz?
Well, I don't know. Aristotle doesn't want to, right?
And then at the end of that, he uses his disease of having become mechanized in a kind of playful, weird. He's using it against power and tweaking the noses. That's so interesting. He really did a good job with that.
Did you get that there was any part of that, playful maneuver that was effeminate, or was feminine?
dreamlike, I'd say, you know,
But
just
a little
bit, yeah, just like in a dream.
I didn't notice that before.
Yeah.
I think everything that's over 100 years old looks gay to us now because we're so concerned with grabbing our crotches and asking masculine just to make sure everyone knows.
Well, when he walked away from the machine, he seemed to be more dancing and flowing. Yeah, in spite of the machine.
Yeah,
I liked his ballet.
Yeah.
Well, the time has come for me to show what is my favorite clip of all the clips of the Bronowski series. This is the one where this is what really got me excited about it. In fact, this is the one I showed to a friend of mine who's kind of negative and rejective of educational material, and she was amazed by this, and then that made me amazed, and then that really validated it. When Mikey likes Life cereal, you know that Life cereal is great.
Yeah. Well, how many favorite clips do you have?
70.
Every week there's a favorite clip.
I know. I was exaggerating. I was exaggerating on those times, but this time I'm not exaggerating.
You're getting better and better, you know.
Superlative.
The change in the scale of time in the factories was ghastly and destructive. But the change in the scale of power opened the future. Matthew Boulton of the Lunar Society, for example, built a factory which was a showplace because Boulton's kind of metalwork depended on the skill of craftsmen. Here, James Watt came to build the spectacular symbol, the sun god of all power, the steam engine. In 1776, Matthew Boulton in Birmingham was very excited about his new partnership with James Watt to build the steam engine. When Boswell came to see him that year, he said to him grandly, "We sell here, sir, what all the world desires to have, power." It's a lovely phrase, but it's also true. Power is a new preoccupation, in a sense, a new idea in science. The Industrial Revolution, the English Revolution, turned out to be the great discoverer of power. Sources of energy were sought in nature: wind, sun, water, steam, coal. And the question suddenly came up, why are they all one? What relation exists between them? That had never been asked before. Until then, science had been entirely concerned with exploring nature as she is. But now the modern conception of transforming nature had come up. Sadi Carnot, a French engineer, looking at steam engines like this, old engines, founded in essence the science of thermodynamics, the dynamics of heat. Energy had become the central concept in science, and its main concern was the unity of nature, of which energy is the core.
Okay, I know there's a second part, and that's gonna be. I wanted to stop there because it was getting a little bit long. So, I mean, so I don't know what to say about that. We're all monists today. We're all convinced that everything, that all differences are superficial, and that deep down everything must be one because the universe is one in some way, at least in a way of harmony, maybe, or in a way of intermeshing or consistency. Certainly one. But back then, heat, chemical energy, mechanical energy, solar energy, were electricity. These were all different genera, and the idea that they were expressions of a fungible interior thing, and that later became the self. That even consciousness is the same. So that's like a religious insight, in my view, something, a mystical religious insight. So anyway, I like that.
The equivalence is really interesting, but the differences are also interesting. I mean, water power and electric power, we can make an analogy and we can see how they work in similar ways. And we can do reductionism and explain water power in terms of electrons and molecules and their interactions, which turns it into looking like there's electricity that makes water into a solid substance because, you know, the molecules resist each other electrically. But is that really water power? Because what we're ignoring, you know, is the gravity moving it is what you were talking about. And we haven't unified gravity and everything else. And that unification is an abstraction. They are different. I mean, the whole, you know, everything's different. The unity is a little bit of us reflecting in it. Right? I mean, there's a unity and diversity. I guess never having seen the unity before, this was a great era for putting them together, converting mechanical energy into, you know, burning coal and turning the steam energy into the mechanical energy into the water. The ability to unify it is something, to equate them in some way, to have fun, make it fungible. But what are we learning? There's still diversity. So, I mean, if you want power, you can go somewhere else and make it out of something else. It doesn't change our relationship to power. We still want to control stuff with it.
What I find interesting in a way with that power thing is that in a way I was surprised it was connected. I just made this connection back to Heraclitus. I mean, the Greek made a mistake because they thought the universe was made of the 4 elements. But Heraclitus thought that it was movement, the different rates of movement, right? So Earth was more permanent, but Heraclitus actually said that it transforms itself as well. But we have water which flows and moves. You never stand the same river twice. Air obviously moves because they know about wind power, you know, and then fire, which is really thermal power. So it's kind of interesting that if they had, because they thought of elements as kind of embodiment of spirits, I think, you know, in other words, something that was more like a feeling that's consolidated in the world. They never quite had the atomic, well, somebody else, Democritus, actually talked about atomic theory, but they never translated fully into a material structure, and so therefore they could never exploit it. But it's kind of interesting how on a very theoretical, or maybe you might say metaphysical level, they actually thought about power in that sense, about movement. It wasn't, everything wasn't still.
But what you were saying is related to what Scott was saying about the idea of consciousness also being energy. So they were on the same track. It was still, you know, they were right about it in a sense.
Yeah, but they didn't have the right basis for the translation, you know, and I think that's how the ancients never made that connection. The Egyptian thought it was magic, you know, they thought it was spirit, you know, that kind of thing.
But action at a distance is magic.
Well, that's true. Okay, that's kind of true, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it was the thing that I'd like to focus on is that Scott's concept that everything was coming into like a unified view, and that philosophically this is describing our culture, right? This describes our psychology. Yeah. Is that and Dave, you said it just before Scott. It's like everything's formed into one thing, and we have these ironies, these you know, these quantum entanglement issues, and you know, this probability reality that we have to kind of live with or somehow resolve. And you know, how far up the knowledge chain do we actually have to go to say maybe we were aligned just a little bit incorrectly, you know? So I don't know. I think that's fascinating that we look at these other civilizations and we see, or these other cultures, and we see how they were fragmented, how they, you know, like with the beginning of power, it was a plurality of like the power gods. You know, the coal represented one thing and the electricity represented something else, but the abstract ability to say that it's all one entity and we call it a capital P is unique.
We're doing that now.
Exactly. Yeah.
We want the green gods. We don't want the coal gods.
Mm.
We don't consider all energy equal.
Yeah.
Because they really aren't going to treat the universe the same way. So, you know,
we're breaking them apart again, maybe now, right?
We're recognizing the differences, right? In terms of that thing that like Phil was talking about, which is the aspect of it that has to do with your living, right? Which we were forgetting because we were quantizing and just getting more and more power, as opposed to what quality of power? What do we do to ourselves to make this power? You know, we turn the river into a dam. What do we do to traveling in the river and enjoying the river and swimming in the river? You know, and the animals and the fish. And what do we've done to nature by controlling it?
You know, so here's our angst. We're swimming in this like angst of worry. But if you see how we're transforming into such an objective species that we're actually becoming more and more godlike. A species to be able to objectively look at itself and say, we should engineer all of this so that we're working in harmony with the, it's like a mechanization and then back to back into nature again.
You're scaring me because there's an omnipotent God, which is that's like a false God. And there's the loving God. You know, you have to have, God would be the whole deal, not just go for the power, you know. So we're not turning into gods. We're turning into intelligences with the tree of knowledge, not the whole wisdom thing.
Well, I'm not so sure that we should turn away from gods in that sense. I mean, in a very abstract sense. Because one of the things that the Greeks certainly understood was that human beings could become very arrogant and rule out other possibilities, right? So therefore, I think particularly when you're trying to grasp the infinite with a limited mind and think that you could become that, you have become arrogant in a very deep sense because you've ignored so many other things. First of all, when you have finite mind trying to contemplate the infinite, you can never get there. So therefore, you can never really understand. All you could create is an illusion, and you're creating an illusion that, in a sense, is arrogance that's going to destroy everything. So
I think we're going too far with this.
We could come.
Probably because I was the instigator of the claim of godlike, but so that's the reason why I wanted to interrupt Phil, because let me change the word for a minute. Let's say that we're living in a utopia, right? More utopian like, and the reason is I see why the terminology of godlike is problematic. Absolutely, it's actually a really rough one to try and defend. It's hard, it's awkward, very awkward, and almost just antithetical with any kind of.
But it's a good ideal to hold up to say, hey, are we living up to the things we should be living up to?
Kind of, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. God serves that function for Feuerbach and Marx. God is all of our best ideas and all of our greatest hopes preserved in a preservative and put up on a shelf. Yes, we've projected and otherized and put it in the sky, but better that than have nothing at all. At least we've preserved our greatest ideals, and they're there. Maybe the future can access them and implement them. The point, of course, is to implement them, but at least there's something to implement off in formaldehyde somewhere.
Well, the infinite.
And I'm saying that's the core constituent, the thing that's running through, that's necessary for culture. It's transmitting that. That's the idea.
That's Marx's 11th thesis. The point is to bring the good into the world. This is the kingdom of God idea from apocalyptic Judaism. There's a perfectness out there somewhere, but our job is to integrate it and like materialize it and bring it into the reality.
Fix the broken parts.
Oh, by the way, the reason I like this clip now, so this is one of those clips that all your life will change your view on it. And the reason I like this clip today is because it's pointing out how Phil's dynamism and Dave's magic, this urge, it was the urge to change and transform nature that led to the insight that power is fungible. So a descriptive spectator relationship to nature wouldn't have brought that out. So it was our rubbing elbows with it and getting dirty with it and like trying to bend it, and which led to a realization. I thought that was nice because it was purely based on our meddling that brought this thing out.
I wanted to say this is my favorite clip.
It's not.
Okay. So here's the second half of that clip that I abruptly threw off because this is the sweet romanticism part where we talk about how these new models of nature led to a new model of who am I?
Energy had become the central concept in science, and its main concern was the unity of nature, of which energy is the core. And not only in science. You see, the surprise is that while this is going on, what is going on in literature? The uprush of romantic poetry round about the year 1800. How could the romantic poets be interested in industry? Very simply, the new concept of nature as the carrier of energy took them by storm. They loved the word storm. A young German philosopher, Friedrich von Schelling, exactly in 1799, started a new form of philosophy, which has remained powerful in Germany, Naturphilosophie, philosophy of nature. From him, Coleridge brought it to England, the Lake poets had it, and the young Wedgwoods, who were friends of Coleridge's and indeed supported him. All poets and painters were suddenly captured by the idea that nature is the fountain of power, all whose different forms are expressions of the same central force, namely energy. And not only nature. Romantic poetry says in the plainest way that man himself is the carrier of a divine, at least a natural energy. The Industrial Revolution created freedom in practice for men who wanted to fulfill what they had in them, a concept inconceivable 100 years earlier. But hand in hand, romantic thought inspired those men to make of their freedom a new sense of personality in nature. It was said, best of all, by the greatest of the Romantic poets, William Blake. Very simply, energy is eternal delight.
Yeah,
then what's better than seeing the self in the other, the inner and the outer? This is what we all want, this unalienating, reconnecting with all things. You know, the opposite of isolation is, I mean, even the Christian hell is defined as just precisely this being alone. So are we dying to reconnect? And so this idea that I am the force of the storm is the internal emotional force in me. That's what the sky is doing when it's having that. You know, I think that's a healing metaphysics.
A unification with nature you can do in that yourself.
And so what about today? Today we live in a world where reality has been digested into bits and digital systems, which are purely functional because the infrastructure doesn't make a difference. You can render it in in a Babbage engine, or you can render it electronically. But the point is, there's nothing there. It's just sets and functions and cellular automata. It's nothing. And so now we've identified as this, haven't we? This idea that I'm going to upload myself because I am really a relational construct, and I can exist in an electronic plasma, or I can exist on a motherboard. That the thing doesn't matter. So is this a kind of new romanticism where now it's the digital nothingness, the functionalist existence that allows? Is that the new eternal?
I find it very hard to understand the relationship of information and energy, which, you know, Shannon and Boltzmann are supposed to in some way connect states of energy. with states of information. But that's
No,
at a very abstract level. So turning things into digital, where there's information, somehow to me doesn't capture the energy. But this is part of physics, is looking at these as also being unified. Like
See,
right?
I think there's two natures in this sense. I was in a group that studied the Tao Te Ching and Lao Tzu, and somebody asked, like, well, what is fundamental? What is Lao Tzu's fundamental idea? And the guy says, well, it's the return to nature. And then I followed up by asking, but which nature? The nature of materials or the nature of living things? Right? Those are two very different natures, and they sometimes are in conflict, because living things, in a sense, is trying to find a way to survive in a material nature. And we have thought of energy as really just the physical material nature, and we have not paid enough attention to the nature of living things. Even in the Garden of Eden, there's two trees, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. We have paid too much attention to the tree of knowledge and that nature, and somehow we're thinking that somehow that is actually in the domination of the tree of life, which is living nature, right? Which is trying to operate within the material nature. I told them, like, the decisive moment when Moses went up to Mount Sinai was not when God appeared as a burning bush and wrote down the 10 Commandments, but when he came back and he saw that the Israelites were worshiping the golden calf. He became so angry that he threw down the 10 Commandments, and it fractured. The fracturing is actually what nature is in the tree of life, and allows between the cracks for you to interpret and make new understandings of what nature would be. And all of living things are actually living between the cracks and not in the material themselves. So we have to understand that, and we need to be more sympathetic to other living things, because if we just think about it as the material nature, all we could do is be the gardener that manage living things. I think environmental science has finally come to that conclusion that there is another nature besides material.
Right. Yeah, that's deep ecology, isn't it? Where it's a super mystical approach to the living systems, and everything is mycelial and interconnected. And if you can recognize how you are actually non-local, externally smeared out thing, then you'll be happier and better behaved and instantaneously something.
I'm not going to go that far. I'm just going to say that you have to be sympathetic that nature, between trees, for instance, they talk to each other, they understand each other to a certain degree. We always think of it as really survival of the fittest. The big tree is shading the forest to prevent competition. In fact, now science has found out that they actually help each other as well as operating against each other.
But survival of the fittest is not something we understand in our guts, because it's a statistical, cooperative, multi-generational process. So it's a flattening of the complexity of what the real natural growth is, right? Because nature in real life is not just competing. It's not that simple, right? But that's our name for this process. So it's a theory, but it's hard to understand how it really works.
Partly it's hard to understand because we never pay attention to it. We never ate from the tree of life, and we're finally beginning to understand that.
But our unity with, I think there's this Buddhist unity with the cosmos is, maybe that's an extreme of it, but we have to go outside of our little shell view of ourselves as material in order to understand anything about life, and then to understand other consciousness. So I think these are shells of transitioning to higher levels of understanding. Not that one excludes the other. You need the the different levels.
But isn't that what you do as a living thing? For instance, you have laws, you have things, and you know the laws are wrong, and you try to you skirt around it without trying to break a deeper law. I mean, in some sense, it's actually your ability to maneuver within a solid structure that allows you to live, particularly the people who are oppressed, because if they can't do that, they continue to be oppressed.
Yeah, but we're all pretty limited at framing that process. We do it. It's like trying to describe your own walking. We're not that good at really describing what we're doing. We can all do it. It's complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, on that topic of, I always try to use evolutionary biology and psychology to explain everything. But there's a good book about how this is a bad idea by David Stove. It's called Darwinian Fairy Tales, where he says that this hyper competitiveness just can't be the case, because these early human societies did all sorts of stuff. I mean, you'd think that the strongest human would just wipe out all the betas and take all the women. I mean,
no, it's not Darwinism. What I'm saying is that each individual organism has adopted a living structure that's particular to it, so they're very distinct, rather than the fact that a survival of the fittest, what we got left is this. In fact, it's actually a combination of that. And in a sense, for instance, one fish is quite different from another fish. It is not the survival of the fittest. Each one has as unique differentiation from another one. And so you have to appreciate the difference as well as the identity. So it's not just a classification. Fish all swim. How they swim is different. We have to start appreciating difference. That's all.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
All right. Well, here's the second to last clip.
From its earliest beginnings, when it was still dependent on water power, the Industrial Revolution was terribly cruel to those whose lives and livelihood it overturned. Revolutions are. Yet it became, in time, a social revolution, and established that social equality, equality of rights, above all intellectual equality, on which we depend. Where would a man like me be? Where would you be if we had been born before 1800? We still live in the middle of the Industrial Revolution and find it hard to see its implications. But the future will say of it that in the Ascent of Man, it is a step, a stride as powerful as the Renaissance. The Renaissance established the dignity of man. The Industrial Revolution established the unity of nature. That was done by scientists and romantic poets who saw that the wind and the sea and the stream and the steam and the coal are all created by the heat of the sun, and that heat itself is a form of energy. A good many men thought of that, but it was established above all by one man, James Prescott Joule of Manchester.
So I say we should all be rational mythologists like Aleister Crowley and go back to worshiping the sun, because the sun actually, factually, material, it is the source. It is the God upon which we stand. It is the God within which we move. So how about some sun worship?
God, you don't worship the sun. You don't worship the sun.
Oh yes, that's right. Well, I'm from Miami, and I have a love-hate relationship with it, because all my friends are Cuban and very tan, and I was never. Yeah. I wasn't getting laid when I was 14 and 15 because I felt my skin was too white.
It's the jealousy. It's the jealousy thing.
I would be on my roof every weekend burning myself up so I could look Cuban, so I could find a girlfriend.
It's like, what are we going to do? We're going to get fried. And I'm out in the sun whenever I can be. No, I mean, we should. I think Phil said this, like we have to bless the sun when we see it. We have to thank the moon. We have to, praise the earth. We have to, respect them and give them dignity and speak to them, because we don't know their consciousness, but we should address them. I mean, it's a practice. That's a good thing. I totally believe in that. Like, it's insane religion, but I was like, yeah, do it. What do you, it's going to train you for where you are. Why not?
Yeah.
Why don't we do that?
I was talking to Robert Hanna the other day, and he says that we have, perfect geometrical and phenomenal knowledge, and then everything outside of that really is up for grabs. So why not just have a pious attitude towards it, and that you'll there's all sorts of beneficial effects just from doing that. You don't know what it is. It likely is something like a supportive intelligence, something. I mean, why not?
Can we make a movement on the left that says this is cool now? I mean, can we do that, please?
Is it guys? Is it a version of a Pascal's wager?
It's more a reality principle for Freud. Like, this is really the world we're not in touch with.
Okay.
I mean, you can call it Pascal's way. That's part of the deal. You get that for free. That's in the bargain. Yeah.
All right.
Can't go wrong with it. Can't go wrong.
Yeah.
How can you go wrong having gratitude for everything that's coming around?
Yeah,
Well,
I agree with you. Hey, I'm right behind you.
Well, the Egyptians certainly believe in the sun. That means, Amun-Ra is the premier god. In other words, they worship the sun, and they thought it was magic that allows you to communicate with the god, such as Amun-Ra. So they understand.
Yeah, all communication with light, it makes total sense.
And that's where you have the Egyptian gods, where they try to have their material touch the sky, right? This connection between the material world and then the heavens.
That would be magic. Yeah, that's how you think of it. That's how you
build
think of
those.
God.
Yeah, they build those structures to do that, right?
Right.
And
yeah,
and in some ways, I like Egyptian culture, but I'm not going to worship it. But in some ways, it makes sense because they were very good at building. They didn't have like the deep mathematics like the Greeks did, but they knew how to measure. In fact, you could say that they were the first masons, because they were practically doing it. They had very few tools, such as a plumb, but amazing. The pyramids was what, for 2,000 years the tallest building in the world.
Yeah, no, I guess, but my point was about, because I'm trying to. There's a question at the end of this, really, that I'd like your guys' feedback on, and it has to do with the etymology of where the words the sun came from in terms of like a biological offspring, right?
Uh-huh.
But when I consider somebody like Alexander the Great, who enacted this like Amun-Ra sort of like sun god kind of figure, right? He had this godlike effect that people must have said that they're in the look what Alexander did. This one particular person. He's acting like a god. He's taken over all of Persia. Like this is godlike status. This is the things that people chant to and tell war stories about. Well, fuck, I'm doing it right now, right? Living off into the future, right? So my question is more to do with that seeming relationship of sun, like that we worship up in the sky, and how it maps onto the biological chain of like, this is my son.
Zero. I think there's zero connection.
There should be a connection.
No, I think there is a connection in that sense, because he not only conquered Egypt, but they made him kind of a god in a way, even though he died, and there was a difference between like the Greeks, who actually believe in to a certain degree magic, because they had the oracles and so forth. And the Romans, and that's part of the thing about Julius Caesar, was that he was in many ways a modern man, because Julius Caesar claimed that, I did this myself. I conquered all of Gaul, Gaul is divided in 4 parts. In other words, it was a human achievement rather than the fact that somehow I got a lot of help from God, like the sun or any other God, So that was very interesting. And I wonder what would have happened if Julius Caesar was not murdered. I would justifiably say he was killed because the real hero was what Brutus was, one of the heroes, who murdered him because he was becoming a dictator rather than a republican form of government. He was the first manifestation of Napoleon.
Well, then he screwed with fate.
Yeah.
And so he died on magical circumstances when the moon came, it was time in the month for him to die. And there were omens to, announce to that effect. Is Wierzbowski, is he against magic in some way as part of understanding the world?
I think
he wrote it. He's sort of like maybe not giving it its due, or was it part of alchemy? I sort of miss the good part of magic. Maybe there's some. Sorry, guys. Anyway, that was my off the track question.
Well, actually, let me ask you about that. For me, magic just means the fact that there's an internal agency and it is able to yield effects like this, and then everything else is just an extract. Aleister Crowley's definition: magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Do you mean something else besides that?
Well, I guess part of it is that there are effects beyond our intent, and that sometimes those effects are advantageous to our ends that we intended. And so we feel that there's sort of a synchronicity and a universal conspiracy that, this is working out for forces beyond me. Like this, I was an agent in something, and without control, I would say that's a sort of feeling of magic.
Yeah, that's they call that high magic now in the literature. So you're saying that your intentionality really is tilting a probability plane somewhere in real space time and causing real effects to meet you in the future.
Well, like Robert Kennedy's little speech about doing things in your little waves all joining together, and all the waves become like this flow, and that's how like justice unfolds.
Well, depending how you define magic. If you define it as like more like hocus pocus, obviously I don't believe in it. But on the other hand, if you define it as sort of something that a power that exists that's beyond my understanding in a more loose way, I would allow it to exist, because obviously I don't understand that power. I think there are powers that we don't understand. Let's put it that way.
So what Scott's trying to allude to here is that it's the mystic realms, right, Scott? It's the mystic, the magic, the things that are not.
Well, consciousness might be causally related in a non-local, weird way that we don't understand, that bypasses the normal mediations of force. So if I want the coffee cup in my hand, I'll walk to the kitchen and I'll put it in my hand. But it's possible that with the right type of effort, I could change something in a way, and then it comes into my girlfriend's head that she will, in fact, give me the coffee cup. She's not exactly sure why. Maybe she's in a trance, or just, I mean, things there might be will and reality might be linked immediately in a way that we don't understand.
Well, like quantum effects, there are macro and microscopic. So you're looking for macroscopic magical effects, whereas I think a certain amount of living is so unknown. Yeah. So much of what we're doing is so unknown to us. The process is so incomprehensible that, it's like we're on the verge of magic all the time. And it's like hocus pocus. If you think you understand it, got to realize it's closer to hocus pocus. But it's good to look for the explanations, because there will post hoc be an explanation for everything. If you give up and just say the wave function's enough of an explanation, which means nothing.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm a little pro hocus pocus here as well.
Well, I believe if you define it that way, for instance, like I think if you define it that way, Beethoven believed in magic, right? He says he says music is one of the few entrances to a higher wisdom that we do not understand. It understands us, but we don't understand. It's a very mysterious statement because to me, the which we do not understand, I don't know whether he means like we don't understand the higher understanding. We don't understand even music, the pathway that takes us to that. Like, is that magic or is that the oracle? Is that something? It's something that we don't understand. Yet we somehow feel it and appreciate it. Okay. So in that sense, I certainly believe in it. I wouldn't quite call it mysticism, but I would call it like another way of thinking about the world, which is okay.
Can I refer you to the ultimate rationalist, in my opinion, Kant, and then turn to Scott and say, so aren't certain aspects of the rational processes ineffable? We really don't explain them. We just say, yeah, that's what rationality is. We're not how it's turning on, how the senses are getting in there. And we don't explain why we can do this rationality, but we do that, and that's what we got. What kind of explanation do we get? We didn't get an explanation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, our explanations are all based on surfaces and differences. We can handle those. Those are all we have. Surfaces.
Behold. Behold, there it is.
But there could be some biological supporting information for that we perceive, that we have like a biological substrate that recognizes surfaces, and like that is the reality. That is the substrate from which that Kant's describing.
I last time I think I tried to tell you about Anaxagoras, right? He says
you always tell us about Anaxagoras. You say it as often as Scott says that it's his favorite video is coming.
No, it's not my favorite video. I'm just saying you guys didn't want to pay attention to it, but he says not only the full elements.
Phil, wait a minute. I do want to pay attention to it, but you got to bring it up more or something like that. I don't know. What you tell me more information about why he's important.
Well, I don't have more information. But what I'm saying is what he has is good enough in this sense. He says there are the limited understanding and the unlimited. And they're not just outside of each other. They're interwoven in that sense. And the limited has something to do with the fact that we understand numbers and mathematics. Okay? So it's measurement, right? Until we can figure out a higher numbering system of some sort, we cannot understand more of the unlimited. We could get closer. He doesn't explain that we will understand everything, but he says there are things that you just don't understand because we don't have the language for it, the numbers, because we believe so much in terms of numbers. Now, Plato have adapted him as sort of something that's sort of like that measure the gray area, but Plato wanted something eternal, like an idea. We knew these things, we just forgot. We just have to remember it by contemplation and the struggle for it. We'll remember everything, and therefore we know everything.
That's an interesting connection there between the finite and infinite understanding. Robert Hanna, in fact, wants to say that our understanding of the diagonal argument, which shows us that there has to be a continuum, and that we know we can't access it. We can only access things that we can construct, and it has to be decidable. It has to be finite, decidable process. Just the church-Turing thesis. You take parts you understand and you can string them together recursively. That's how our understanding works. But we can use that very system to find like a Gödel incompleteness or to find a diagonal argument, which points us to the existence of a transfinite thing that we can never access. And so this is the point I made earlier about piety. He says we can only have piety towards the transfinite. That's all we can do because it's inaccessible. But we know it's there. Our own recursive finite systems show us that it has to be there, but we can never know it.
But it's graspable. It's
transfinite, and you're meaning possible. Sorry, Scott. Right? It's possible. Transfinite. I'm imagining it's finite. So, but we're imagining something that is finite, right? Is that what you mean?
I'm not sure how to talk about the nature of the transfinite. Dave, you should say something about that.
I think imagination could go beyond the finite.
Right. I would say,
I think
I can only talk about Aleph Null, but Dave is probably qualified to talk about other things like the continuum. And go ahead.
Well, I like Hegel's tact on this, because to me it takes you to the mathematics, and you don't have to do the mathematics for it. It's just the whole concept that we do infinity in two ways. We do this negative kind of thing where we're building and building and tracking and tracking, and we know it's like there's not an end to this, so it's not finite. So that's negative viewing of infinity. The other is we capture it and we say, well, there, that whole thing would be something. And that's, now it's inside there. Now we have the infinite contained within it.
That's like Cantor's omega versus V, right?
You got, and any infinity you build, you're building it one way or the other. And you're looking, these are the two ways to look at it. And, you know, you look at the self, and you have self and moments, but the moments reflecting on themselves creates the capsule for the whole thing, where it's self-relational. So the self is infinite.
Yeah.
So we have, you know, if we recognize what we are, we're this positive infinity, not just this negative infinity, although living in the negative is the way we divide things up.
And I think that brings you back to Parmenides and the man is the measure of all things. To be able to have that realization, I think this is why which makes
this infinite thing, we grasp that. It's our concept. Infinity is a concept we totally get it, you know?
Rudy Rucker wrote a book about this, and that's his thesis, Infinity in the Mind. Have you read that?
No.
Oh, God. So he says the fact that we can reflect on ourselves, reflecting is the base case that proves that we've already grasped the infinite.
Yeah. I mean, thank you, Hegel. I mean, you know, 1802. I don't know when he wrote it. He was like,
and he's Hegel's great grandson. Rudy Rucker is.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He must have read it.
But guys, I have to tell you something that I don't know if I discovered it or not, but there's the cogito from the René Descartes, right? And so if you guys look right now, I want you to do it. Look on Wikipedia, and the first paragraph that shows up for the cogito ergo sum. And it was actually written with a prefix of doubt. So doubt is so integral to the cogito. It's not I think, therefore I am, like some sort of romantic projection of like some sort of sun spirit inside you or something like that. That's not what it is at all. It has nothing to do with that.
No, it's reduction from giving up everything based on doubt. That, you know, he scraped the barrel, and there was the only thing left was he was doing the doubting.
That's
That's right. There's doubt was this fundamental piece.
Yeah.
Well, it was the machine that he used to clear away the uncertain and see what was remaining. So it was like the demon. Remember, Shiva sends a demon to the earth to defeat this other monster that this yogi had become, because he'd meditated so much that he was all powerful. But then this monster couldn't stop consuming things, so he ended up consuming his own body all the way up to his neck, but he couldn't consume his own head. And so that's the thing that got to continue existing. So the act of doubting is the only thing that will survive the process of systematically doubting everything.
Yeah, cool. Gosh.
All right, here's the last little clip here.
The story of the British gentlemen at their scientific eccentricities is not irrelevant. It was such men who made nature romantic. The romantic movement in poetry came step by step with them. We see it in poets like Goethe, who was also a scientist, in men like Beethoven. We see it, first of all, in Wordsworth. The sight of nature as a new quickening of the spirit, because the unity in it was immediate to the heart and mind. Wordsworth had come through here in 1790, when he had been drawn to the continent by the French Revolution. And in 1798, he said in Tintern Abbey what could not be said better. Nature then to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. Nature then to me was all in all. Joule never said it as well as that. But he did say the grand agents of nature are indestructible. And he meant the same thing.
I have to say, you love this series, right? It's something, like you said, the best series ever made on TV. Okay, so I have to point this out. You could, after he stopped speaking, right, the end of that monologue, I felt like standing up and clapping. It was so well put together. Watching him deliver that monologue was just like, and then so what happens? The backdrop of the mountain scenes and you know what I mean? Like, it's just so well done.
All of nature. It's a beautiful fade out with the Leonore Overture, Beethoven, like grabbing you all the way to the end. It's fantastic. It's just brilliant. It's like Kubrik did with music, like Kubrik. That sense of what would fit here. Good editing.
Yeah, it was.
I felt that way when I was 14 years old. There was, I'm from Miami and there's storms a lot. So one day it was particularly stormy outside. So I brought my guitar and my amp and my ghetto blaster out to the patio, and I played Misty Mountain Hop with the thunder and the rain going, and I was just the happiest moment of my life. I felt like I was the storm and I were coexistence, and we were just flying through space together. It was so lovely. I really missed that.
Well, I like the ending because he stopped at the right moment. In other words, it was beyond speech. It was like art. It was like, so if he had continued to speak while that was going on, it wouldn't have been so good. In other words, that there is something beyond words. That was great. And it was like, and I like the fact that it was Beethoven that was being played. It was like, it really captured that spirit, because what it captured to me was the fusion between a man's spirit and nature. Because I think if it was just a waterfall, it wouldn't work as well either. But how man's spirit beyond words was able to, I don't know, describe or fuse with nature, so that it was a fusion of the two that made it for me.
Yeah, he's taking the dignity of man from the Renaissance and unifying it with the unity of nature. Means we're in there too.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool.
And when Wordsworth said that his self had somehow expanded and identified with the sound of the cataract, that reminded me of what David said earlier about the loud clankiness of the machine and the busyness of this like dystopian, loud, like productive culture. It's kind of like this. So there's a dystopian possibility in our romantic tendency to want to be absorbed out into the environment, because we are absorbed out into the environment, maybe as a natural tendency. So in that case, there would be the self-loss could be the ultimate, like an ultimate disaster. Like, like what Baudrillard talks about, the society of the spectacle, which is a kind of a self-loss. You're completely, you've outsourced your will and your agency and your coherence to basically to the television in its delivery of meaning. And so there's two types of absorption: the romantic absorption into the cataract, and then the absorption into the simulacrum through the TV screen.
I think you're right. The problem is when we create industrial nature and we make that our nature, then when we surrender to it, we're surrendering to that instead of the nature we're born in, which is really, look what we're making ourselves seek to become. Like It's really, you're right. We're supposed to externalize ourselves, because being inside is only, capturing ourselves for some purpose. We're supposed to be in the outside.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the natural attitude is outward. That's our natural default attitude. The animal is out. It's out perceiving.
Well, yes, Scott, I don't know if I like the characterization of the Romantics into the the cataract, right? And the reason why I've got an issue with that is I view it as a little different, as almost like the substrate for poetic, mystical thought. But it moves towards a rational end, right? So it's like the point of Figaro, right? It started in the arts. It started in this primal poetic thinking, conjuring sort of mental ease, so to speak, as Pinker would call it. And then it moves into the rational mind, right? It's the beginning of the conception. And so it has a function. It's not just like, it just sits over here and it's kind of a cataract that's a blight on existence, right?
What? Oh, no. What do you mean by cataract?
Well, I thought you meant like a cataract in the eye.
Oh,
no,
God.
the water. The
waterfall. Cataract is waterfall.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No, I saw it slightly differently. It was that there was a feedback loop between the external and the internal in this sense. Because, I think it would not be the same if there wasn't the human appreciation of it as well. I would the illustrators. I remember back several years ago when the Chinese were holding the Olympics, and one of my friends called me up. He said, "You got to watch this. The opening show." He said, "It's just fantastic." And without seeing it, I said, "I'm not interested in the spectacle." Right. And I think part of the problem with modern culture now, as it exists now, is that it's a feedback loop that does not connect to the outside, but is internally feeding on itself. It becomes a spectacle, because the way you could attract that attention then is to create something that's a super alluring, that is beyond contemplation, that in a sense, it becomes a feedback loop about yourself, feeding on yourself in that sense.
Phil, I see it as a big contradiction in your philosophy. I mean, I'll be honest here, and I'll tell you why. There's something about Phil that really likes the Greek. The sympathy is felt over here as well, right? We like Greek culture and this and that. Here we're ripping down the Olympics because of the ceremony. The ceremony is important. Now, may it be embellished with capitalism and a bunch of, but this is the reality of the society we live in. So what happens when Phil says, I don't want to be part of the spectacle? How do you sever that importance of something that is like so Greek in origin, right? About the traditions of the Olympics.
Phil, maybe you're disappointed that they didn't have a transcendent message in what they were doing.
I'm disappointed that in a sense it's so caught up in internalizing itself that creates a short circuit through the feedback loop. At the same way I would feel about the Romans, because the Romans, instead of exploring nature and in a sense creating that dialogue with nature, what the Greek gave them was good enough, but they were interested in conquest, and they were interested in creating a magnificent city that in a sense when somebody comes to it, they can't be helped by seeing the power and the spectacle of what Rome could be. That's what I'm saying. It's a kind of self-projection about one's own power, rather than in a sense seeing that you are in the loop of this greater understanding. That's all I'm saying. The spectacle therefore replaces art, because art is in a sense always about some sort of relationship to something higher, rather than just showing itself in a grand fashion.
There's something we could use with that too. It's like, there's somebody that's been, criticizing the new atheists. I think maybe even someone like Jordan Peterson, who I know not everybody likes, but the idea is that if you don't have a God, if you don't believe in a God, there's a God you believe in. You just you're not aware of what you believe in, right? This kind of thing, right? Like there is something you fundamentally believe, especially if you were born in a North American society, you've got fundamentally, you have Judeo-Christian values, this kind of thing, right? There's certain things like that kind of predate your culture shapes you kind of before you're born, in a way, basically, is what they're culturally predetermined, I guess, right? And so the idea is that if you have these kinds of structures in place, what kind of power structure you worship, whether it's a capitalist system or whether it's an Abrahamic God, it's like it still directs the masses. It moves the groups, right? And so is one really just, it's the power God, it's the capitalist God, it's the no, the one doesn't have like a beard and sit in the clouds and wear a toga. So what? It doesn't matter.
Remember one of the things I said, which is very strange in this society? I actually said that I was lucky to have grew up poor, right? Which is sort of contrary to this society. Like nobody would say that, except I actually feel it because I'm not trapped in a capitalist structure to the degree that I'm already am. Well, so therefore it allows me to have the freedom to like maneuver between the cracks, is what I'm saying. Like that's what freedom really is between the cracks.
Well, doesn't that match up with the Jesus, who says like nothing is more difficult. No, it's more difficult for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. That's sort of saying there's a burden with material stuff that is a spiritual burden.
Yeah, I guess I'm lucky enough to not that I mean, in some ways, of course, I wish I had more money as I grew up. When I grew up, I literally had so little money that I could not afford to go on dates because I didn't have enough money to even buy a hamburger for a girlfriend that I would have taken to a date. I mean, so one does suffer, but in the long run, it liberated me in a different way because it allowed me to not have to be holding as much to the capitalist structure. That's all I'm saying. I mean, I said I was lucky. I mean, I don't know if I have been born rich, whether I would have or even had enough money to live with, that I would have grown up to be as anti-capitalistic as I am, because I never really needed it to that degree. I do need it because I do live in this society. So, I mean, I do concern myself with money, but only in a cautious state, like I better not run out of it. But I'm not trapped by it. So that's it's just a kind of curious thing to say in this society that I was lucky that I was grew up poor. I mean, that's unexpected for anybody to actually sincerely mean that.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering, is Tiny Baby here today? Is there a Tiny Baby? Will Tiny Baby say hello?
Hello, Tiny.
Tiny, hello.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hello.
Sorry, this is my first time to join your discussion. I don't know much about philosophy, but I enjoy your guys' discussion very much. I learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tiny. Thanks for popping by.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Glad to play for you. Glad to play for you. That's what we do.
Thank you.
Imaginative group. And you should definitely feel free to put in your 2 cents because we're missing at least that much, right? Anytime. Feel free.
Well, but on the other hand, she's lucky she doesn't have to put up with us.
And hello, Muffin.
Muffin, oh yeah, Muffin's not likely to say anything. So has anyone seen any movies that celebrate this unity of self and nature in some big, like in super exciting way? I have just one, but I don't want to say what it is because I want to influence the committee.
Oh, okay, but before we do that, are we on the track that it's like we can think these happy thoughts, but there's nothing in reality that even we've come up with that really celebrates being in nature? Is that the idea?
No, I'm just saying, what movie for you has a scene where the protagonist or someone has some type of romantic breakthrough where they realize that the interior and nature are the same?
Right. Okay.
It's a good question.
You know, a long time ago, I saw the movie. I forgot the name, but I think it might be Jeremiah the Mountain Man, played by Robert Redford. The first time I saw it was on video that was in a small screen, with a cutaway from it, and I wasn't that moved by it. But suddenly, when I saw it in CinemaScope, it completely changed my understanding of that movie, because nature was actually, I guess I could say, the second actor in that movie, because he was always relating his existence to nature. And if nature had not been exposed as this grandiose thing that in a sense occupies space that he couldn't escape from, then in a sense it would not be the same movie, because he was in nature, he was living with nature, he was struggling with nature and struggling with the animals and the human beings in that setting. So it was actually a very, very interesting film, because I understood that was actually a character in the movie.
I don't think Apollo 13 does it for you, Scott.
No.
Is that your candidate?
I would say one thing is that it has two things for me. I'm surprised actually how it's so empty, right? It's not like I can say there's a whole host of movies that I would say and I didn't. And so I thought the first part was, these dating sites when you guys were dating a long time ago. Oh, I don't think, David, you went on a dating site or anything like that. But you'd go on and you would say, what's your profile? And there's cliche things like walks on the beach and, going for hikes and all these kind of things, right? I'm not saying they're not that, but people say that they do them all the time, but they don't really do them all the time, right? It's just very cliche. So I was like, you know what? I think that this nature love is a bit of cliche. It's a bit of like, I go out in the nature all the time, right? And then, so I don't think it's the only part where it's really dramatized in such an impactful way is like we saw earlier with the Bronowski piece, where it's like you get just the sheer cinematography of like wide open big vistas or mountainscapes, and that image itself, that's the humbling factor. And then that is ubiquitous in any kind of broad landscape thing. This is why we give awards to like the landscape team of the film production, right? Like the cinematography of how they lay it out, and that awe of form and space in front of us, right? So I think that it's very fundamental, actually, is this idea of a protagonist interaction with its environment, right?
Well, I found something here. I'm not sure if this will work.
Are you going to use the clip? Oh my God!
Yeah. So here it is. Yes, share. I'm afraid that there might have been. Oops.
the fundamental force of the universe, the ether, the spirit.
Science was a fascination I shared with May's father. At Eton, I'd study the work of Cornelius Agrippa. Smells and fumes filled my rooms and the hum of the galvanometer.
Sky's your galvanometer tonight.
I surrounded myself with the instruments of life, beckoning the spark of creation.
Ah, Shelley, the modern Prometheus.
But perhaps something alive can be created.
Calvinism has given token of such things. Although I'm not really qualified to comment on such scientific...
What is your field, Doctor?
I think of myself as a general physician. However, the processes of the mind interest me more than the body. I have written a thesis. The morbo or an edema...
Yes, we know, Polly. The causes and effects of sleepwalking and nightmares.
Do you believe dreams can explain and illustrate the waking state of the mind?
Polly's dreams are invariably the same. Wet.
I've transcribed my dreams since...
Opium dreams?
All dreams.
Nightmares.
It is an age of dreams and nightmares.
Oh, yes, and we are merely the children of the age. But we have all been weaned on blood. The castle of Otranto, Vatic, the monk, the sin page.
And more fun than any Bible.
Yes.
In that sequence, he reads. Everyone takes turns reading from this Gothic ghost stories, which are a certain style, where the protagonist is in an inescapable situation, and they're surrounded by a vague doom, and the doom is unavoidable. They're going to be destroyed, and it's the slow drawing out of the destruction that drives you mad when you read the stories. So each of the people in the party takes a turn reading the story, and they each have their own private, personal, maximal negative reaction to the story. And then Lord Byron says, instead of talking about ghosts and monsters, let's make our own. And this, of course, will become Mary Shelley's idea. So what they do is they gather around a skull and they hold hands. They really did this seance. And they ask that their worst nightmare become materialized into reality. And they try to bring their greatest fears to life. And then the rest of the movie is just fabulous. So anyway, this was the model for me and my friends when we were taking acid as kids. We thought the way to grow is to have the worst bad trip possible, to meet your shadow, and then fully come to understand it. And then this is what you do. And so the movie was like a template for, like, growth or whatever.
Wow. Cool.
So it's called Gothic. So each has Percy Shelley's worst fear was being buried alive. He was just obsessed with it. Lord Byron was terrified of leeches. The doctor there is gay, and he's terrified of being found out, or God's going to find out that he's gay and destroy him for that. And then Mary Shelley is afraid that she would do anything to bring her dead babies back to life because she keeps having miscarriages.
Wow.
It's really cool, Scott.
And then the cousin's afraid of rats. And then she actually becomes the savior of the group because they see her crawling around with a dead rat in her mouth. And they're like, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. And they all decide to meet their worst fears.
Wow.
Anyway.
They're a lot braver than I am, that's for sure.
Definitely disturbing. That's really good.
Yeah.
So the scene is with him. He's out there in the storm, being naked. I thought, that's what you do when you have good friends and good drugs and you have a weekend. You should be out there naked and raising your fist at the sky and communing with God / electricity / lightning / your worst nightmares.
You know what's cool? I just looked it up on Wikipedia, Scott, and here's the thing. It's a amazing favorite film of yours, right? All time, pretty close, right? And it says on Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 50% based off 12 reviews, a weighted average of 5.8 out of 10. And you're just like, what the fuck? How can it be that good to some people and then that horrible to others?
Because it's an art film. It's a surrealist art film.
Yeah. Right. But can't people just appreciate that that's a good representation of us? They have to run it through only one lens, like it's not Fox News, so it's obviously a 2.
I don't know.
It's not exactly 2. Come
I
on.
mean, I can't be objective about it because when I saw the film, it was so exciting. I thought, this is what adults do when they're liberated. Because I was still in high school and I was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I thought, wow, that's possible. Back then, people were doing that, talking about alchemy, just making shit up and being super liberal and imaginative. And their hope was super sky high. I guess this is before people became just disappointed and super alien. I guess once upon a time, maybe there was an in-between stage where science was just coming up and then the possibilities were really stupendous. I mean, who knew what maybe magic could be realized through electricity or something like that? You know, like Galvani was moving frog legs, right, with electricity, and then look, all of a sudden, wow, the spirit is actually electricity, and then oh my God, so suddenly the Frankenstein possibilities all around you, and what's inanimate and animate is no longer clearly distinguished.
Yeah.
Well, the way you told this story makes me feel like seeing a different dimension of Newton, because I always thought he was a bit of a hypocrite for being an alchemist and yet accepted the glory of being a scientist. But maybe he was just living out your dreams in a way. Like, in other words, maybe that's not such a bad thing after all. Because I really like Newton, but on the other hand, you know, I didn't like the hypocritical part, but maybe that's not hypocritical. Maybe that's what the society require you to do at that point.
Well, you know how we talk about child mind being something we want to advance to in order to be open to things, right? I think there's something to be said, although I hadn't thought of it before. This was a cool example of adolescent brain, which is a point in your life where you are at this fringe of something and you're believing what the adults, what power is really there, which they've lost track of. So you're the only one in touch with this. And that's a lot like the Romantic era. I mean, it's the connection of Romanticism and the power you feel as an adolescent, which if you could only access it, you know, it would really come to be what you're expecting. There's something about adolescent brain we don't idealize, which is really wonderful here.
I think it's got a Nietzschean undertone as well.
Continue.
Well, just, I mean, it has Nietzschean sort of like power kind of thing, like not having to sit back on your laurel, like go and seize it, grab it, you know, sort of thing, right? And on your nature, it's your nature to do that. It's the nature of the man to, you know, to want to overcome, you know. Definitely. And that's kind of how we felt, a little bit indestructible when we were younger. And I think it's just a risk factor thing, right? I mean, how we perceive risk when we're younger versus how when we get older. We just perceive risk differently.
You shouldn't lose it.
Well, contemporary brain science tells us, you know, at a certain developmental stage, we decided, not we, but like somehow evolution or whatever has decided for us that we need to prune back all those neural connections in order to create room for connection between various regions of our brain. So I wonder whether that itself is a recognition of the limitations of what the brain could actually fit. So within a limited brain, if you're trying to grasp the unlimited and keep growing those neural connections without pruning it back, then you run into a different problem. I wonder what would happen if we had more capacity in our brain, that we didn't have to prune it back at least that early, and maybe we would be more at that stage where you could actually be able to have connection and yet be freer to expand at the same time.
I think we already have that. I mean, not in the freer part. I mean, although there's some contradictions in that too, but I think we have that already with our connections to Google, our connections to the internet. It is this, you know, transcendent sort of artificial space, right? And oh, we got another movie here.
I picked this up from a bookseller in Geneva last week. Phantasmagoria.
Goose stories.
Yes, from the German.
Let me?
No. Wait. Time enough. Chill my blood.
Family portraits.
On that fateful night, I remember moonlight bathed the windswept shore which bordered our ancestral estate. Our daughter was late, very late, and I stood anxiously awaiting any sign of her return. I could see nothing. I could hear only the low moaning of the wind in the trees, a moaning that somehow drew my tired and nervous mind to a shape hanging twisted like a discarded plaything from the hideous branches.
Consumed with fears for the safety of our youngest child, I flew to the window and shut it tight, and perceived in a part of the grounds less dark than the rest, the same figure from the vile portrait in its grey mantle, advancing towards the castle with slow and soundless deliberation, shrouded by a veil of mist that reeked of the charnel house.
The intent of the undead monster had become horribly clear. Escape was impossible. We were trapped in his web without the strength or knowledge to combat his dark and awesome power. Urged by a perverse compulsion, already gorged on my daughter, it now sought to take from us the innocent heir to its accursed line. I felt suddenly icy cold. The vile stench of the tomb gripped my senses as the ghastly apparition entered the room. Paralyzed with fear, I watched helplessly as the spectre moved towards the bed.
Some sort, yes.
He's been trying to bleed me for everything from syphilis to heartburn, the bastard!
They only suck blood, my lord.
Excusez-moi.
These leeches. You know what worse than was.
Oh, calm down. It was just a silly prank.
Lord,
That's all.
no.
Let's leave it
The
at that.
elixir of life, according to Paracelsus.
Yes. And who are we to argue?
As the spectre turned away from the unconscious child and started towards me, I was petrified with horror. I was completely at its mercy, neither able to move nor shut my eyes.
What is it? I'm all right. But suddenly I had an image of a woman I'd been told I'd meet. And the madness was that she had eyes in her breasts.
I have some ether.
Bugger ether! I want laudanum.
How many drops do you take a day? 100? 1,000? 5,000?
I can handle it. I don't need a quack's opinion. Just this headache in my brain like a scorpion.
Oh, it had a happy ending. I hate happy endings. He should have butchered the little brat.
Hey, sorry guys, I'm gonna have to leave and eat dinner. So
well, now's the perfect time to do that.
Yeah, really. You have leeches for dinner.
Yeah, just have some leeches and rice.
yeah, right. Now I have to leave because that scene has fulfilled every male fantasy that I. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I suppose it's time to say goodnight. It's 12:15 here, just about.
Yeah, I know. It's been a long night. I'm glad you're. Thanks for coming,
Good.
Dave.
Good stuff. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you the next time around.
See ya.
Interesting movie. Thank you.
Oh God, it's so great. Yeah, go. That you can download on the BitTorrent for free. It's definitely worth watching.
Good night, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Remember Gothic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you enjoy the discussion?
Yeah. Yeah, this is my favorite episode from the series.
That's nice. It seems that they also enjoy the discussion too.
Good.
Thank you.